I'm going to hand things over to our board chair for a motion, I believe.
In order to comply with Section 2.2-3712D of the Code of Virginia, it is necessary for the board to certify that since the Fairfax County School Board convened a closed meeting on April 8th, 2025, to the best of each board member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the board during the closed meeting. All those in favor, or do I have a motion? Ms. Anderson, do I have a second? Ms. St. John Cunning, all those in favor of the motion? Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Anderson, Ms. St. John Cunning, Mr. McDaniel, Mr. Moon, Ms. Dixit, and myself. That is unanimous for board members present at the table. And I will now turn it back over to our meeting managers.
Thank you. This will be the second work session that we've held on the annual update of student rights and responsibilities document. So as we go through this presentation and we hear from staff, please keep in mind this is the second iteration. There have been some updates since our first work session on this. And with that, I'll hand things over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. So this morning, it just feels like afternoon, but this morning we have staff returning. They have made requisite adjustments based on the prior work session that the board engaged with, as well as they've gone back to meet with members of the staff. And so this morning, I know they've done a tremendous amount of work. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. King and her team to present where we are currently with the student rights and responsibilities. So Dr. King.
Thank you, Dr. Reed, and good morning, school board members, division leadership, colleagues, community members. Welcome to the second SR&R work session for the 2025-2026 school year. Today, we are building on discussions from our March 12th session. Our work continues to focus on ensuring that SR&R regulation is aligned with state guidance, community feedback, and the division's commitment to providing safe, supportive, and empowered learning environments for every student in alignment with Goal 2 of our strategic plan. At this time, I'd like to introduce members of the Chief Equity Office who have been instrumental in leading this work. Kathleen Waltz, Executive Director of Equity and Student Relations, Deanna Shin, Senior Manager 2 for Equity Student Conduct, Lisa Forrest, Administrative Hearings Officer, and we have several members of our team in the audience as well who will be here to answer any questions that might need to be answered. Now I'm going to invite Kathleen Waltz to begin our presentation and guide us through the foundational elements of today's discussion.
Good morning. Our desired outcomes today are to review the final proposed discipline recommendations and the final proposed cell phone policy and storage recommendations for the SR&R. Based on the guidance provided today, the red line version of Regulation 2601 will be posted as new business for the April 24th, 2025 regular school board meeting. Today's session is divided into three key areas. First, we will explore the final proposed discipline-related changes to the SR&R. Second, we will review the final proposed changes to our cell phone policy and storage. All of the final proposed changes are in response to school board and/or principal feedback collected during the March 11th work session or in further discussion with principals. After reviewing these changes, our team will open the floor for collaborative discussion and questions from the school board to solidify the final red line changes. I will now turn our presentation over to Deanna Shin, who will review the final proposed discipline changes.
Our first focused area is the final proposed discipline changes. These recommendations are based on feedback gathered during the March 11th work session. As part of the SR&R, revisions focusing on clarity and enforcement, we initially proposed changes that state for possession or use of statutory weapons, possession or use of switchblades, machetes, and certain other knives, and use of other weapons, administrators would be required to issue a suspension for up to 10 days, unless the referring administrator determined that mitigating factors, such as the student's age, background, intent, previous infractions, disability status, and/or other circumstances, should not warrant a suspension. The original proposal also required a referral to the school-based risk prevention team for further assessment and intervention in accordance with Regulation 2111. During the March 11th work session, school board members provided feedback expressing concern that the allowance for administrative discretion and suspension decisions for weapon-related violations could still result in inconsistent discipline outcomes across schools. Members emphasized that even with guidance, such discretion might continue to undermine the division's efforts to reduce disproportionality, particularly for students with disabilities, Black students, Hispanic students, multilingual learners, economically disadvantaged students, and male students. In response to this feedback, the final proposed change now mandates that for any violations involving possession or use of statutory weapons, possession or use of switchblades, machetes, and certain other knives, and use of other weapon, the following 2 actions shall be required without exception: a suspension for up to 10 days, and a referral to the school-based risk prevention team to determine appropriateness for further risk assessment in accordance with Regulation 2111, and any other appropriate intervention as designated by the referring administrator. The final proposed change removes administrative discretion regarding the imposition of suspension for these offenses. This ensures that a consistent, non-discretionary consequence is applied across the division, thereby reinforcing a uniform, equitable application of the SR&R. By requiring both suspension and risk prevention team referral for these weapon-related incidents, the updated regulation balances student and school safety with the structured intervention framework, ensuring both immediate and long-term supports are put in place for students involved. As part of the SR&R revisions, we initially proposed adding a monitoring requirement to Regulation 2601 to provide oversight specifically to 2 critical areas. First, the application of administrative discretion related to suspension decisions for weapons violations. And second, the consistent use of required interventions for weapons assault and assault and battery violations. The original proposed change recommended creating a new section in the introductory portion of Regulation 2601 titled Monitoring and Enforcement. The language originally proposed stated, "The Chief Equity Office, in collaboration with the Office of the Chief of Schools, shall conduct a semester review of all discipline cases involving weapons assault and battery to determine the use of required intervention and factors considered prior to issuing a suspension for the related violations." The intent of this proposal was to enhance oversight by ensuring that administrators both applied required interventions and thoughtfully considered student-specific factors before suspending a student for serious violations. During the March 11th work session, school board members provided feedback that discretion in suspension decisions, even if monitored, could still lead to inconsistent discipline outcomes and undermine efforts to reduce disproportionality. Board members expressed concern that allowing administrators to consider factors prior to suspension could continue to result in unequal application of discipline practices across schools. In response to this feedback, and because the final discipline proposal removes the administrative discretion provision for suspension decisions related to weapons violations, staff determined there's no longer a need for a separate formal monitoring process of discretionary factors. With discretion eliminated, it is sufficient to monitor the use of required interventions for weapons assault and assault and battery, and compliance with suspension practices related to these infractions can be addressed through standard discipline audit and reporting processes already in place across the division. As a result of this feedback and internal review, the final proposed change simplifies the monitoring provision. The new proposed section of the regulation will state, "The Chief Equity Office, in collaboration with the Chief of Schools, shall conduct a semester review of all discipline cases involving weapons, assault and battery to determine use of required intervention." This adjustment ensures a streamlined, consistent approach to oversight while reinforcing the division's commitment to clear, equitable, and uniform enforcement of the SR&R. Since the March 11th work session, the governor signed Senate Bill 980, which amends policies and procedures related to the prevention of and response to cyberbullying in schools. Specifically, 980 requires that all local school boards establish policies that address cyberbullying in alignment with model policies to be developed by the Virginia Department of Education. These model policies provide regulatory guidance on preventing and responding to incidents of cyberbullying, including incidents that occur off school property but have an impact on the school environment. Under SB 980, the new policies must also provide protections to ensure that any student who is a victim or witness of cyberbullying is not deterred from reporting incidents or seeking support. In addition, the policies must include a list of available support services and resources for students impacted by cyberbullying. At this time, We are awaiting the Virginia Department of Education's issuance of the required model policies. Once the VDOE model policies are finalized and released, the SR&R will be revised accordingly to incorporate the mandated procedures and protections related to cyberbullying. We will continue to monitor the development of the model policies closely and ensure that any necessary updates to Regulation 2601 are brought forward in a timely manner to maintain compliance with state law and to enhance protections for all students. To enhance clarity and enforcement within the SR&R, several proposed changes to the discipline matrix were brought forward during the March 11th work session. The proposed changes include the inclusion of a K6 icon within the discipline matrix, the addition of matrix instructions to guide users through the appropriate disciplinary process, the addition of a corresponding narrative column in the matrix to reference where additional information can be found, a matrix key footnote directing users to the page containing the matrix key, and a matrix footnote clarifying that SBAR code BSC 27 related to weapons includes blades less than 3 inches and pneumatic weapons. Following the March 11th work session, no feedback was received from the school board regarding these proposed changes. As such, unless new feedback is provided during today's session, we plan to move forward with redlining these revisions into the SR&R. To further strengthen clarity and enforcement within the SR&R, several proposed changes related to drugs and assault violations were presented during the last work session. The proposed changes include a revision to BESO 6, which would require administrators to use the signs and symptoms of substance use within the FCPS overdose protocols before determining that a student is under the influence. The definition of assault is proposed to be updated to reflect the VDOE definition, clarifying that assault occurs without physical injury. Additionally, the proposed changes would require interventions for all assault violations. It is also proposed that a new narrative section for assault and battery be added, using the VDOE definition, which distinguishes assault and battery as occurring with physical injury. To further enhance clarity, the proposed changes would create a new SBAR code, BESO1B, for group assault and battery violations. Finally, the narrative provisions related to hazing would be separated into their own distinct narrative section, recognizing that hazing is a unique violation with its own SBAR code. Following the work session, no feedback was received from the school board regarding these proposed changes. As such, unless new feedback is provided during today's session, we plan to move forward with redlining these revisions into the SR&R. Several proposed changes related to data entry, parent notification, administrator training, and directed support were presented during the last work session. The proposed changes include requiring discipline data entry into SIS for all discipline violations, parent notification within 24 hours of a disciplinary incident, required intervention for any SR&R violation, and annual integrated discipline training for all school-based administrators. Integrated discipline training would include training on updates to the SR&R, scenario-based discipline processing, Title IX, bullying and harassment, bias and discrimination, discipline data entry, and requirements for turnkey training with school-based staff. Finally, the proposed changes would remove the school counselor as a required school team member for receiving discipline concerns and directing this responsibility to the school-based administrative team. Following the work session, no feedback was received from the school board regarding these proposed changes. As such, unless new feedback is provided during today's session, we plan to move forward with redlining these revisions into the SR&R. Proposed changes to enhance clarity around specific terms and definitions within the SR&R were presented during the last work session. The proposed changes include revising the definition of hate speech to include religion as a protected class and symbols, changing the term stealing to theft for consistency, incest, and removing the term stakeholder and replacing it with community partner or community organization. Following the work session, no feedback was received from the school board regarding these proposed changes. As such, unless new feedback is provided during today's session, we plan to move forward with redlining these revisions into the SR&R. And finally, proposed changes related to the following general terms and definitions within the SR&R regulation were presented during the previous session. The proposed changes include adding definitions for the following terms listed here. Following the work session, no feedback was received from the school board regarding these proposed changes. As such, unless new feedback is provided during today's session, we plan to move forward with redlining these revisions. With the discipline revisions concluded, we will now shift our focus to the second major topic of today's session, the cell phone policy and storage recommendations, which will be presented by Kathleen Waltz.
To initiate our conversation, we will begin by reviewing data collected from the cell phone pilot program, focus groups, community forums, and surveys conducted in response to school board follow-on motions issued in May 2024. Extensive data related to these findings was previously provided to the board. Cell phone violation data was evaluated at the schools participating in the storage unit pilot. Between the first day of school, August 19th, 2024, and September 30th, 2024, there were 428 cell phone violations at the control or comparison middle schools, compared to 164 cell phone violations at the storage middle schools. During the same time period, there were 1,587 cell phone violations at the control or comparison high schools, compared to 1,170 violations at the storage high schools. Between October 1st, 2024 and January 31st, 2025, there were 809 cell phone violations at the control or comparison middle schools, compared to 433 cell phone violations at the storage middle schools. During this same period, there were 2,107 cell phone violations at the control or comparison high schools, compared to 1,936 violations at the storage high schools. These findings indicate that the pilot schools implementing storage units had slightly fewer cell phone policy violations inputted into SIS during both time periods captured. However, the difference was only slight. The possible positive impact of the storage units appears to be more pronounced at the beginning of the school year, from August 19th through September 30th, than when compared to the period from October 1st through January 31st. Participants of the focus groups were asked about their perceptions of the storage units piloted at the 30 pilot schools. For pouch storage, which was piloted at the middle schools, participants identified the following benefits: an enhanced learning environment, forced consistency, reduced behavioral issues, and a reduction in teacher burden. The drawbacks or considerations associated with pouch storage included students circumventing the rules, the impact on teaching practices, and inconvenience and loss of instructional time. For door storage and tote storage options, which were piloted at the high schools, participants identified encouraging student accountability and the formation of routines as the primary benefits. The drawbacks or considerations identified for these options included a lack of consistent enforcement and student resistance. Deanna?
While the findings collected from the follow-on data points, including the pilot, focus groups, community forum, and survey, are critical to informing next steps, the signing of Senate Bill 738 directly impacts any preceding cell phone policy. In revising the cell phone policy recommendations, findings from multiple data sources, including the requirements outlined in SB 738, were consulted and directly informed the proposed revisions. In addition to the earlier data points presented, new data sources were reviewed and considered. These include the cell phone violation data, a letter from the High School Principals Association, and convenings with high school principals to gather additional recommendations and feedback. These additional sources of information, including the signing of SB 738, arose after the March 11th work session and have played an important role in shaping the final proposed policy revisions being presented today. Based on the passage of Senate Bill 738, the following changes to the SR&R regarding cell phone use in schools are proposed to go into effect on July 1st, 2025. The SR&R will be amended to ban student possession and use of cell phones, personal tablets, cell phone accessories, and smart devices on school property bell to bell. Bell to bell is defined as the period beginning when the first bell rings at the start of the school day to initiate instructional time, and ending when the dismissal bell rings at the conclusion of the school day. The bell-to-bell period includes lunch and the time between classes. Under the proposed changes, student cell phones, personal tablets, cell phone accessories, and smart devices may no longer be used as instructional tools during the school day. Schools must ensure that the implementation and enforcement of this policy is the responsibility of the school administration, and that enforcement minimizes, to the extent possible, any conflict with the instructional responsibilities of teachers or any disturbance to instructional time. Appropriate accommodations must be provided for students with IEPs, 504 plans, or medical conditions in accordance with applicable laws and regulations. Students may not be suspended or expelled solely as a consequence of violating the cell phone policy. However, any violation of this policy that involves, coincides with, or results in an instance of disruptive behavior that is not solely related to a cell phone violation shall be addressed in accordance with the SR&R. In regards to storage, following the passage of Senate Bill 738, several new implications and factors must be considered regarding cell phone storage practices within FCPS. There is a cost associated with implementing storage pouches or units at all FCPS schools. While the pilot program showed success both anecdotally and through quantitative data with fewer cell phone violations evident at storage schools compared to non-storage schools, it is important to note that these data points were based on implementation under the current FCPS cell phone policy, which will be significantly different beginning July 1 under the new state law. Additionally, principals have expressed that any decision regarding cell phone storage must be approached with consistency and equity across schools to support fair and successful implementation. The language of SB 738 related to enforcement responsibilities will place pressure on administrators to ensure compliance with the policy. Storage units are seen as a mitigating factor that can assist administrators by working in tandem with other resources to help students adapt to the new requirements under the law. Given these factors, the superintendent recommends that all students be required to personally store their cell phones, personal tablets, cell phone accessories, and smart devices, keeping them off and away from the arrival bell to the dismissal bell each day. In the next 3 slides, you will see the proposed discipline matrix that governs violations of the cell phone policy. After receiving feedback and convening with administrators, the proposed matrix changes focus specifically on required interventions at each level of violation and the loss of privilege upon a 4th violation. Interventions are required for every violation level, which aligns with the VDOE model policy and with the proposed SR&R revision requiring interventions for every SR&R violation. However, administrators are not required to complete all interventions within the cell phone discipline matrix. This is reflected by the addition of the word "or" between intervention options. The use of "or" clarifies that administrators may select one intervention from the list rather than completing every listed intervention for each violation. Lastly, for a 4th violation, the loss of privilege is restored back to 20 days instead of the originally proposed 5 to 10 days. This change was made at the request of school administrators included in the pilot program. As a result of the final proposed cell phone policy, we recommend the inclusion of 2 additional terms and definitions to further enhance clarity within the SR&R. The terms bell-to-bell and smart device are proposed for addition. The definitions for these terms directly reflect the language and definitions established in Senate Bill 738. Including these terms will ensure consistency between state law and division policy and provide students, families, and staff with clear and shared understanding of key expectations under the new requirements.
Today marks the conclusion of our final work session before we move forward with the redlining of the 526 Students' Rights and Responsibility Regulation. A tremendous amount of thoughtful work has gone into this process. Our team has greatly engaged with feedback from students, families, staff, administrators, and community partners. We have closely monitored evolving state guidance to ensure our policies align with the law while staying true to the needs and values of the Fairfax County community. Throughout this process, we have remained focused on achieving the goals outlined in our strategic plan and advancing division priorities around equitable discipline practices. Further, our proposed changes reflect a deliberate effort to address discipline disproportionality by revising policies towards consistent enforcement and evidence-based strategy in the reduction of discipline disparities. The proposed changes we present today reflect a collective commitment, one rooted in clarity, consistency, and a care for every student we serve. We thank you for your collaboration, your feedback, and your shared dedication to making FCPS a place where all students can learn and grow and thrive. At this time, we welcome your questions and final reflections.
Thank you. I'd like to thank staff for the presentation, and we'll go to our first question. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you, and I appreciate the hard work in taking the feedback from the work session, although I'll save this question for a little bit later on the feedback from the work session. The first question I have is, I appreciate you sharing also the amended law itself, so we could take a look at the language. So I'm a little curious, and Dr. Reed, I'm going to ask you this question. I see on slide, I can see the numbers on here, the slide that recommends the proposed changes based on the new law, that we're recommending a bell-to-bell ban. However, the law only recommends a restriction, and a restriction and a ban are not the same thing. So I'm wondering why, and in fact, the law says age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate restrictions, but we seem to be going beyond that by recommending a ban without recommending anything on age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate. So I'm wondering why we're going beyond the law, what the thinking was around that.
So thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. I think that, and it's a great question. We've wrestled with this for some time. I think that the current version of the governor's bill has been characterized as essentially banning cell phone use bell to bell. And as you know, our prior regulation has required that it be out of class use, and we've had storage, but we allowed cell phone use between classes and at lunch for high school students. So I think the characterization of the ban bell to bell is what led to the recommendation, but upon closer scrutiny, the bill actually, or the law actually, to your point, does talk about developmentally appropriate restrictions. So that would leave the door open to have a dialogue amongst the board about the developmentally appropriate allowance of cell phones, perhaps during the lunch hour or between classes. So it's certainly, I think, a conversation to be had. At this point, the recommendation is, a bell-to-bell, keep the phones out of sight.
So if I'm understanding you, the recommendation for the ban was based on the perception that the law banned it, but I'm not hearing any other reasons for going beyond the law other than that was a perception. And I'm really a little hesitant on making a more restriction with the only reason for it being because we think that's what the law says, which
Yes,
is what I'm
ma'am.
hearing.
Yes, ma'am.
And I mean, the law is right here. It's only a page. It's not that long to read, and that's not what the law says. So, and the reason I bring this up, and the reason I think this is important is, one, we're putting in our slides, based on the law, we recommend a ban. We need to be careful how we read it. Second of all, I really think it's important because when we put the cell phone restrictions in, I think now 3 years ago, we wrestled with what to do at high school. And we banned cell phone usage in classrooms outside of teachers needing it for instructional purposes. And it was bell to bell for elementary and middle school. But for high school, we talked about the fact that there are I firmly believe that we need to think about all of our students, right? Not just the ones with the loudest voices, but all of our students. And when I talk to students and their families, I think about the students who are parents themselves and have children they may need to reach. I think about the students who may be working to help support their families, which may be more now given what's happening with the economy and the federal government, given the fact that we have a high percentage of people who are newly immigrants or a high percentage living under the poverty level and who qualify for free and reduced meals. A lot of those students are working shift work. If you're working shift work and your boss texts you saying, can you pick up this shift, and you don't answer within that whole day, you might lose that income. Those are the students that I think about. So I'm wondering why we are not recommending an age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate restriction that allows checking cell phones during lunchtime. I think about the students who desperately want to be included in the lunchroom with their friends, but may not have a 504 or IEP and need some sensory reduction, may not qualify for a 504 IEP because maybe that sensory need doesn't actually impact them in their educational environment because the classroom's not that noisy, but may in the lunchroom. So I'm wondering why those students weren't taken into account when the law seems to allow an age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate restriction.
Thank you, Rachna, for those questions. When we took our recommendation to the superintendent for consideration, we looked at number 1, where it said, except as provided in subdivision 4, number 1 under B in the law. Oh, line what? Oh, line 24, I'm sorry. Except as provided in subdivision 4, restrict cell phone and smart device possession and use on school property from bell to bell. So our interpretation of restrict means not allow use.
You could be restricted to your, restriction ban are not the same word. I'm just putting that out there, and I kind of want to understand why we're conflating the word restrict and the word ban.
So I'm gonna take that one on. I think that we could read it more conservatively or more liberally in the sense of our imposition of the regulation. And at this point, I think the recommendation from staff is to take that more conservative approach. I do think you raised some good points, and we certainly can adjust that to provide, I think you could still keep within the law, to your question. You could keep within the law and restrict as developmentally appropriate its use during instructional time and between classes, but allow a phone check-in at lunchtime and still be within the bounds of the law as long as we identify it as a developmentally appropriate use of the phone. So I think we could certainly interpret it that way and still be within the law of the Commonwealth at this time.
Thank you.
Chairman Frisch?
Thanks so much. Assuming, let's say we're taking the conservative approach, what steps can the school division take to ensure, one of the things that came up in our initial discussion several years ago, it seems like far longer than 3 years ago at this point, but I think it has been 3 years. We talked a lot about the stigmatization of students being able to be identified as having a 504 or an IEP based on them having a phone. If that's the only reason that they have it, then everybody knows automatically. What steps can be taken as a school division to mitigate the outing of students based on their IEP and 504 status, based on their access to those devices?
So I think that I think as we work to create a culture that's inclusive of students in all manners in which they best learn, clearly that would be first and foremost, right? Respect the needs of one another and come from a space that is welcoming regardless, right? You and I happen to be wearing glasses today. Not everybody is. I'm okay with it. You're okay with it. But as a young child, sometimes the first time you put glasses on, you're not okay with it. So we need to create an environment and a culture within our schools that regardless of the tools we need, that's okay, right? So I would also say, though, that allowing, or to Ms. Sizemore-Heiser's point about allowing a developmentally appropriate usage of phones at lunch would call less attention to a student who required that. On the other hand, I know that from parents and staff and students, just having that distraction not present in front of them is also very important, right? This is not a simple solution. It has complex impact. And we have to remember developmentally, we also have high school students that are 18 at times 19 and are heading off to school, work, life, and just how do we also talk about the responsible use and practice that in high school. So all of those, I think, are part of this conversation, so I appreciate having it this morning.
What steps can we take as a division to put more of the onus on parents to police the proper use of these devices? And in two ways, I'm thinking. One, ensuring that they know that times are changing and that direct contact with their student via the device is not going to be as easy as it once was, and that they should be going through the main office. And secondarily, arming them with the tools they need to properly police the device itself on their end through user settings.
I think those are great questions. I mean, at the end of the day, parents are providing, for most, not all, but for many of our students, it's parents that are providing and paying the data fees, right? So I think that that's a conversation our parents should have with our students about what is the appropriate use of a cell phone. And it's not the phone itself, the tool, right? It's the access to so much damaging and negative social media content and the algorithmic, obviously, pull of the phone. I would say, though, that, letting parents know that we certainly have in division ways to monitor laptop use, but a lot of the chatter we had hoped to eliminate or limit has moved to different types of devices, right? So I know our school staff and leaders are wrestling with just sometimes our students appear to be a step ahead of us regardless of the rules we implement. But I do think having that conversation with parents is very important.
My time has been going for like a minute and a half. Can you restore it back to 2 minutes, please?
I also have to recognize that as we sit here, the students in our schools have never not had cell phones. So they've grown up in a very different environment around these tools than we did. So I think there are lots of ways we could work with parents. And I think we'll explore those.
So the proposal seems to indicate that schools, principals would have the discretion of choosing how to enforce the policy, whether it's away in your backpack or your bag or what have you, or in a storage device. Would those be implemented at the school level or on the classroom level? So would a principal who decides to use a storage receptacle of some kind, would that be implemented throughout the entire school or based on the classroom?
It would be a school-by-school decision, not a classroom-by-classroom decision.
Great. Which leads me to my next question, which is, obviously, there's always going to be room for refinement on these policies. So because it is school by school, the superintendent could reflect on data gathered based on changes in the policy and how the schools implement the policy to see what the most efficacious implementation has been over a period of time.
Yes, sir, we could do that.
Well, I'll be interested to see, based on Ms. Sizemore-Heiser's line of questioning, where we end up on this subject. I do think that there are two things that could be read out of this legislation. One, exactly how Ms. Sizemore-Heiser has interpreted what does the word restrict mean. At the same time, line 24 and subsection 4 would indicate that the only restriction allowable beyond bell to bell is for an IEP over 504, which I have a general problem with because of, it potentially outing students, et cetera. But I'll be interested to see how that progresses. I will be bringing a follow-on motion for the SR&R to evolve the way that our board engages on the SR&R to align it with our EL process so that we're not taking up such a significant amount of board time every single year when it could be part of our standard evaluation process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. Ms. Anderson?
So our chair was in my brain. He asked most of my questions, so I'm not going to repeat everything. I did want to reiterate that I am also concerned about protecting the rights of our kiddos with IEPs and 504s. The other aspect that I found very interesting when I was listening to what Ms. Sizemore-Heiser said is that when you go back, we can't actually eliminate student possession of a cell phone. It's still technically they're going to be possessing it because it's still on their person, which actually gets me to my next point. And then I'll go back to one of Mr. Frisch's questions. Is there a possibility, as a parent, I sign the SR&R every year to say that I understand what's in it and that my children will abide by it? Is there a way that we could put something in the SR&R that actually acknowledged the fact that the cell phone is a private device that's being brought into our schools? So it's a personal device that you are making a decision to bring in, which also would help, I think, with some of this idea about possession. It would acknowledge the restriction. I just think that in the before time when we didn't have a device for each student, if a student brought a device in, they were required to their parent was required to sign a personal device notice. So I think that is an appropriate thing for us to do here, to acknowledge that these are devices that parents are allowing their students to bring to school. And so if that's the case, then I think that it would make sense for us to protect ourselves just a little bit that way.
Ms. Anderson, are you saying that just like the parents have to sign off on the SR&R, there would be another signature sheet? Are you asking for another signature sheet?
No, I'm actually asking it to be part of the SR&R itself, so that way when they're signing off, they understand that if they're sending a device with their student, that it's their responsibility to monitor that device.
Okay, thank you.
So that's one thing. The second thing is, we have, as a school system, kind of moved away. I went to school when it was absolutely the main office that were the sub-school or whatever that was collecting information to get to students related to all the different things. And our email devices, or our email program, quite appropriately, doesn't allow parents to email their students at school, which I absolutely agree with. Do we have the staff required to meet the new communication expectations of parents during the day? Because I think that we're going to have to come up with a system that we actually talk to schools about related to the fact that how we're going to make sure that parent communication, because we're in a much different time than when I was growing up, where just the sheer volume of communication that goes on between parents and students, I don't think we're prepared for that as a division. So I think that that would definitely be something that we would need to look toward. And the final thing I want to say is that looking from the findings of the pilots, what we were doing was working. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. I particularly look at the minimal amount of impact that the pilot had on the high school level, which indicates to me that if we don't figure out some less restrictive way to manage this, it's going to continue to be a battle with high school students that I don't particularly want our staff to be engaged with. I think that it's a waste of our time.
Ms. Dixit.
Thank you for the presentation. I believe that word restrict also doesn't mean ban. It means reduced, I guess, access to the phones. I believe students also have rights, and also taking it away fully from them during the entire day. I think we're doing some disservice to our high school students who may be working after school or have other classes or commitments and taking care of their siblings. So there could be 100 other reasons why they could need a phone during recess. So I don't like this ban and bell-to-bell ban, just because I want them give them a little bit of time in between to just check their phone messages. Also in time of emergency, and God forbid that happens, our school is under attack or shooting. I do want parents to be able to communicate with their students in some possible way. So I wanted to ask you, in case the equity office, that what is your understanding in the term of students who may need phone during lunch breaks? What is the problem with that?
Before the law was passed, we had a different recommendation to allow what you are asking. Our interpretation of the law was that we were supposed to restrict use from bell to bell, and that's why we brought the recommendation forward.
Oh, okay. So again, the law, we can talk more about the law's interpretation, and my interpretation is same as Ms. Sizemore said, that it is to be restricted in some capacity, but not, it's like you restrict, doing something doesn't actually mean you don't do it. Like I could be wrong, but this is my understanding. Also wanted to know about the implementation. I mean, all rules are great and policies are great, but it comes to implementation. Some schools have better success with school cell phone than the others. And consistency is the key. And I just feel like if we put our teachers in the middle of grabbing the phones from the students, I think it just puts a lot of pressure on them too. I think they don't like doing it. So the devices, should be an automatic thing when student is signing SR&R and they are supposed to do that. It should be kind of inbuilt into them. So I think the more the consistency is across the district with every school, I think the students are going to be like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do, and giving them some respect also. This is, giving them some respect of them being able to use their phone at some time. I think we can gain their respect back. So I think it's a mutual respect we have to do at this time. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dixit. Ms. Marin.
Yeah, I was so ready to be like, yes, let's just do it. You're presenting us with the recommendation, but there's still questions. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, a few things. So before the board, it seems like we have some consensus to figure out, are we going to do bell to bell completely or allowing for lunch at high school? Okay, so that would be, if the staff is going to propose what they're proposing, that means that we either need to ask for amendment now or we amend it when we vote on it. The implementation, the how. Are they going to be pouches? Are they going to be hangers? The front office calls, that's a great idea. Are families now going to be flooding the front office with things? Relatedly, the funds needed to implement. Do we have to buy things? And then the communications to families. But there's just, I feel like there's an overall philosophy too. Like just this week, my daughter said, hey, can I have Instagram because my soccer team is posting updates and I don't know what's happening. I see the updates. So like we've got to be consistent. If we're going to not have them on devices, if it's to limit them from the social media that they're not useful for, well, then there's all these social media accounts by all these clubs that principals are posting to. So, what do we do about that? Because they're still going to need to see those things, unless it's totally duplicative content just delivered. But this particular piece of content was not duplicative. I like the idea Ms. Anderson suggested about the sign-off. I recall this past year when the SR&R sign-off by parents was digitized, great, but like I somehow hit something and it was gone and I was done and I had agreed and I hadn't scrolled through anything. So I think, and I remember we talked with Mr. Sethi at the time, but like really being sure that that is a meaningful process. I know sometimes like you can't scroll through, you can't just click yes until you've actually scrolled through, which is like a minimum. But, I've thought, and we've talked for a while, how do we really get parents and families to read it, so I'm all for like an extra, like when you go to the doctor and they're like, do you agree to this? Do you agree to this? Really have them go through these prompts. I also received this week attendance updates for each of my children, and so I'm wondering, is there something, which is great, and whether they're chronically absent or not, they're not, but I just want to say, could there be some kind of a report like that, like your child has had this many violations of the cell phone, or this, maybe it's something like, I don't know, I'm not trying to make more work, but, what's the least worst decision? Because we have to decide. And we can also know that laws can be changed, and we could reinterpret the law. Students will really, really dislike this. And I really don't feel good about doing that. So I'd love if we could get to some kind of consensus. Are we feeling that we would want to do the bell-to-bell or, interpret restrict to be what we have now, which is allowed during lunch, implementation, the funds needed, and the communications. So I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. So number one, there are no funds planning on expending on this particular recommendation because the high school was planned, I believe, to keep the cell phones, if they have them on their person, not to be seen, correct? So they're not taking them out every period and putting them somewhere since they're not supposed to have them. So I believe that's where the high school principals landed. So there are no funds expended in the high school side currently with the recommendation. The middle school, those middle schools who had the pouches and want to keep them, were saying fine, and other middle schools felt like they got good results with simply enforcing and not purchasing that. So that's a choice they're going to be making. So no funds. Secondly, I think the question really is the enforcement, right? Regardless of which way we end up. I do believe that expectation's been made clear both by Dr. King's office and Dr. Ponce's office, as well as our region staff, that we have to be consistent in our accountability across the division, regardless of where we land. So I think that's been improved this year, just with that heightened sense of awareness about, enforcing expectations with cell phones.
Dr. Anderson?
Thank you. I want to build a little bit of more understanding regarding the bill. I think I read it the way that Mr. Frisch read it. There is an exception in subdivision 4 that speaks to a small cluster of students. Dr. Reed, can you point it to me, the area that gives us flexibility in terms of interpretation? Just the line?
I don't have the line in front of me, but I can phone a friend. I think Ms. Sizemore-Heiser has the name of the line, but I believe in the reading of it, there's a developmentally appropriate restriction characterization that is not explicitly closing the door on the possible use, in particular by developmentally aged individuals. So it would be lines 16 and 17 perhaps? 21, 22? Yeah, 21, 22, and 24, I believe.
Okay.
I do agree it could be clearer, and I think that's where you can sort of read it for, it's a little bit like statistics, right? I guess we can use them to tell the story we wish, but I think you can read it either way. I do think you could make the argument, though, that developmentally appropriate restrictions might look different for a 12-year-old than an 18-year-old.
Okay, I'll circle back to that in just a little bit. Thank you for finding that for me. And I think what I'm hearing a little bit, it started in the conversation, the existing materials for schools that have yonder pouches and the hanging things and the receptacles. So if they want to keep using them, they can, and if they do not, what will happen? I would hate for that financial investment to be for naught.
So in speaking to the 7 schools that have purchased pouches, they want to continue to use those pouches. Our recommendation is to allow middle schools or high schools that desire to use their own school funding to help enforce it. We gave them that latitude in our recommendation. But the 7 that had made it very clear to us in our meeting since March 11th that they want to be able to use their pouches. And additionally, there's about 4 or 5 other middle schools that would like to purchase pouches as well. We made it clear that the division would not be spending any funding, but if they want to utilize their own school budgets to do that, the recommendation allows for them to do that.
Thank you. And if I remember from our last discussion, there was a concern regarding using classroom, pouches because of the in and out of students taking out their backpack to include it in a pouch and putting it back in 7 times throughout the day. Can you speak to that a little, please?
Yes, our recommendation does not allow for those types of storage units to be used, right? We said because of the bell-to-bell that we interpreted in the law, that we did not want students engaging in their phone every 90 minutes by taking it out and putting it in something. So the high schools, in meeting with the high school principals, they agreed as well and came to consensus around the language that we recommended, which was if you're going to use storage, the storage must be bell to bell at that point. And high school said that they wanted to use the personal use, or if schools have lockers and the kids can use the lockers, but it is not, they're not going to purchase pouches unless a principal decides that they want to use that money to do so.
Thank you. Is Mr. Foster here?
No, ma'am, he is not.
Okay, so I cannot ask him that question. One of the things that I talked to you all when I met during my 2x2 is exactly having some more acknowledgement of the different components of the SR&R, particularly the pieces that are changing significantly around weapons, assault, et cetera. I think it will be a great thing, and we talked about this just on that cover sheet, whether it be electronic or physical, where each section gets its own line for an initialing. I understand, assault weapons, this will happen. And I understand, X will happen for this other section, because it brings the attention to it, because that one full signature, it's pretty much arbitrary. And we do find, not arbitrary, that's not the word, perfunctory. When we find that parents are digging into the SR&R, it's because there's a reason to, because their kid is in process. We want them to know it ahead of time, similarly to what I raised for students. The student education piece and the parent education piece regarding what they can do to help mitigate student use. I mean, I've put it in my newsletter, I've shared it with all of my principals, like these are the steps to go in your kid's iPhone and to limit what they can have access throughout the day. It doesn't hurt. How many people are doing it? I don't know, but the Anderson children are not happy because it's happening for them. So I'm just going to say that. But I do, and unless, I'd like to hear from Mr. Foster. I know he's not here, but I don't think I am seeing the language being interpreted in the way that our
colleagues are seeing it. I do see it as bell to bell. And I do wonder, and again, this is not clean. This is not black or white. This is a lot of gray. There are a lot of different circumstances. But I also wonder about how will it impact what principals and school staff need to do? Because one of my biggest concerns is this becoming kind of a teacher-heavy enforcement issue, taking away time from instruction. I'll take a
Thank you. Mr. Moon?
Thank you. Comment or two, or question or two, and then perhaps a request. This sort of last minute legislation from General Assembly is really helping us, but at the same time, causing some confusion on our part. Some of my colleagues already stated that restrict to be interpreted other than banning. I mean, I can certainly agree with that. That can be certainly interpreted that. So this is a sort of question and request. A lot of times when you are unable to ascertain what the legislation or legislators truly meant to say in the legislation, you look at legislative history, and if they can be found, and I was looking at this particular legislation, and all that I see is it began from September of 2024, started in Senate, and then there was House version, and then there were a lot of discussion between Senate and House, and at one point they could not reach a compromise, and then Senate ended up acceding to a House bill, and then came to this. If we can somehow find the discussions they had to come to this point, they might give us some clues as to what they meant to say by restriction as opposed to any other languages. That's one, if that can be done, because I'm not able to find that right away. Whether they have any minutes from those committee meetings and et cetera, and look through those. That's a request. Question that I have is, reflecting on this House Bill 1961 and your proposal, 1961 seems to asking each school district to develop a policy that implementation and enforcement of which should be the responsibility of administration, school administration, and minimizing loss of instructional times, or minimizing responsibilities or duties put upon classroom teachers. But use of cell phones or other smart devices, if they occur in classrooms, we don't see school administrators in every classroom all the time. How will we be able to enforce, at the same time minimize loss of instructional time or duties upon classroom instructors to be able to enforce this?
Mr. Moon, during our pilot process, we had these conversations with our principals, and what they did as part of the pilot was schools set it up separately. Some of them have a Google Doc where the teacher goes into the Google Doc and says the student violated, and the administrator handles it. Some call the front office and have an administrator come and deal with it. But this year, teachers were not to handle the cell phones. It was upon the administrator to handle the cell phone and the discipline of the cell phone.
I guess I'm going to have to ask for go back.
At this time, I would ask for members that don't want to go back to put down their placards, because I know some of you guys left them up. Thank you, and I think I captured everybody that did put them back up. We'll go back in the order of our first round. Ms. Sizemore Heiser.
Thank you. A couple of things I want to just go back to. I appreciate the comment about looking at the legislative history. However, that's the second step, I believe. The first step is look at the plain language meaning of the word. So when you just Google the dictionary definition of restrict, it refers to the act of setting boundaries, limits, or conditions on something. Indicates an act of imposing rules or conditions how something can be used or distributed. It does not say ban or stop usage of or prevent. It's clearly limits, not bans. So I don't think we'd even need to go look at the intent because the plain language meaning of the word is limit. So I think that gives us leeway in what we want to do. And I'd be curious what the high school principals would say if you asked them that this was an option. And I don't know if you did or not, but like, it seems like if the law was interpreted as banned, then I'd be curious what they said. But beyond that, I also wanted to kind of get back to, I appreciate my colleague bringing up the stigma of IEPs 504s. I don't see anything in these plans to really address that. When I talk to families of IEP 504 students, the number one reason they do not want their kid included is because of bullying. I appreciate the glasses analogy, but glasses are not necessarily a coveted item. Cell phones are a coveted item. I know, yours are beautiful, I do like them, but they're not necessarily a coveted item the way cell phones are. And you give students access to a coveted item because they need it for an accommodation when other students don't. You are setting them up to be the targets of bullying. And what are we doing around that? I have asked this question for 2 years since we did the first ban. And I have yet to hear what we're actually doing to make sure, and this is the reason why, and then I hear from staff that we can't include kids because the parents don't want it. It's this like vicious cycle. So I do want an answer to that if we're gonna do this, what are we gonna do to make sure the kids who need access for medical, disability, English language reasons are protected? I will need to go back to my other point. If I could get an answer to that question, that'd be great.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. King?
Yes, Ms. Osmerheiser, I agree with you. And, it's the expectation that our teachers do what we expect them to do. And if our students are allowed to use these devices as part of an IEP or a 504, it is upon the teachers who service that student to ensure, a case manager would know and alert the other teachers that serve that student that they know that.
That's not with all due respect, that's a different question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's a question of whether the teachers are going to punish the student for using the cell phone.
Okay.
I'm asking, what are we doing to prevent other students from bullying the student or pressuring them to let them use their cell phone because they don't have access and this student does?
I mean, we have bullying expectations, right? And I expect that if a student is bullying a student with access to a tool, that they're addressed through the SR&R like any other student who violates our rules.
With all due respect, Dr. Reed, I appreciate that statement, but when we're setting kids up in this way, we need to do more than just saying, well, these are our rules. I know our time is up.
Yes, ma'am. I will convene staff and work on some additional strategies.
Chairman Frisch?
Thank you. So this would not be the first time that the General Assembly has passed imprecise legislation impacting our schools. So I anticipate that if, the legislation doesn't define the word restriction, had it defined the word restriction, we wouldn't be having this kind of extended conversation about it. It doesn't mean that they won't address this discrepancy in future revisions to this section of the code as well. And so my general issue is, when I read the legislation, I was reading it from the perception of me defining what the word restriction means, right? And so when I had decided myself that it meant a complete ban because of the conversation out in the public, I was able to find, I think it was line 24 in section 4, read in tandem would be that the only exception would be for 504s and IEPs. But because nowhere in the legislation does it define what the word restriction is, a restriction can be from the lightest rebuke to the most strenuous denial. Because it's not defined, it leaves it open to interpretation, I think. And I would struggle to see how any school division in Virginia's current plan could not fit into this legislation, including the recommendations that the board received at its previous SR&R conversation about, a month ago. at the work session. So perhaps at some point, the General Assembly will button up their approach to the legislation. And I can say from my time working in Congress on the Rules Committee that if Congress passed laws that were not clear and specific, the courts, rely on the plain language, and only when that plain language does not ferret out clarity do they go back and try to interpret what the intent behind the legislation was, which is not always clear based on the conversation.
Thank you, Chairman Frisch. Vice Chair Anderson.
Not to further elaborate on this point, the only other thing that I want to say is being someone who went to a secondary school, I'm not only worried about the kids, I'm not only worried about the teachers, I'm worried about every teacher that someone passes in the hallway that yells at you for being on your cell phone. So it's not just, and it's othering in the hallways, it's all the things. So we have significant members of our staff that don't need to know what every student's IEP is, and that's private information that needs to be kept with the people who need to know it. So I just worry about how we're going to mitigate some of those things as we move forward so that we don't create environments that are unsafe for our kids. The other thing that I wanted to quickly mention is actually a procedural question that I have for some of my colleagues, is that the things that were recommended in the last work session related to SR&R were not actually codified in any consensus vote or consensus taking on our next steps document related to the changes. And I know a precocious third grader that unintentionally created a knife out of a piece of silverware in order to cut his food at lunch. And I wonder whether or not that would have been dealt with the same way as someone who's actually bringing a machete to school. And so I'm a little concerned about not having any variation. I understand that we don't want the disparity in discipline. However, my concern is that the way we're actually going to get there is that things are just not going to be recorded, which is what we're trying to get away from. And so I am concerned that if we don't have some mitigating language, then it means that we're just not going to be recording what's going on. So then we don't really know when we have a problem because it's going to be further in the disparity that we're actually trying to move away from. So I am not actually, it wouldn't have been something that I would have supported to take that out. And so I am wondering whether or not it was your office's decision to take it out based on our conversation, because I don't think that it was necessarily an agreed on board direction. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Ms. Anderson, you're correct.
Ms. Marin.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Ms. Anderson, because I'm okay with everything the staff has proposed about the SR&R language so far, barring the cell phone piece. But I had wondered, Dr. King, when we're saying we made it not, your team made it so that it wasn't up to discretion for the suspension of the 10 days and the factors prior to suspension. Well, what are the criteria then? Are those already in the SR&R to determine if a child gets suspended for 1 to 10 days? It was slide 5 and 6, but the board asked to not have it up to discretion of the staff member to assign the suspension time of 1 to 10 days. So that's been removed. But what now are the criteria? How is it determined whether suspension is 1 day or 10 days? Like, we've removed the subjectivity of the person, but is it even more subjective now because there's actually no guidance?
So, thank you for that question. So currently, right now, the proposed change is that it is a 10-day suspension for that particular violation, and it is not within the discretion to have less than that particular 10 days. I'm sorry, it's up to 10 days. So they can have anywhere from 1 to up to 10.
Right, so who's deciding whether it's 1 or 10?
It's at the discretion of the administrator, that is correct.
That was removed from the document.
So the administrator can determine the duration of suspension, but not other factors in determining whether to suspend.
But what factors will the administrator use?
To determine the duration?
Yes.
Those are factors that are typically determined in suspension.
So we're right back where we started, aren't we? That now instead of explicitly stating they're going to take all those factors in consideration, now we're saying don't consider that, but they're clearly going to consider something. So without explicitly, I'd rather have it in there saying, considering their past experience or age, than have nothing at all, and then it's more open to bias or subjectivity. So that's on that. And I'm feeling pressured because I want to share about cell phones. Yeah, it's sloppy work by the General Assembly and the governor. And we're supposed to have local control, and the fact that the governor is dictating what is happening in our classrooms is why it's sloppy and unclear. I came into this meeting before the legislation of a few months, as Mr. Moon pointed out, thinking, okay, I'm good to go with the have them out at lunch, because we talked about that's what this board wanted. So I would love if we could, raise hands or say in our turns who is for what the staff is, their interpretation, and who's in for the interpretation that allows for us to restrict it in the way we see fit, and that would mean allowing it during lunch. I think if we can get to that, it will really help us. Thanks.
Chair, is that allowed during a work session? Okay, by a show of hands, would the board like to take a vote to show consensus? On, oh. Oh, okay.
Before we take that vote, may I ask Mr. Foster some questions first?
Sure. Okay, thanks. So actually, Dr. Anderson, it's your turn. So.
Okay, Mr. Foster just came in. The conversation at the table is regarding the language and the cell phone policy, whether it is I guess I'm following you, okay, whether it is a restriction or a ban, and is that applicable to student groups outside of those identified on line 33? I'll give you some time to take a look, because I do have other questions that are unrelated to cell phones. In one of the pages, and please number these just to make it for easier reference, but in one of the pages, talked about the removal of the school counselor from a team. Can you give a little bit of background there, please?
So originally, there were several portions throughout the SR&R that stated that counselors are the ones that could be fielding potential concerns around disciplinary decisions. And so we wanted to redirect those concerns around disciplinary decisions to administrative teams instead of to counselors. It doesn't preclude a parent from discussing the concern around the outcome of a disciplination or how to be able to support a student, but the concern itself and how to address it according to the SR&R should be directed to the administrative team.
So what you're saying is that counselors were making disciplinary decisions?
No, but potentially with the language in the SR&R, it permitted a parent to go to a counselor to discuss a very specific disciplinary concern around an outcome versus taking that to the administrator.
So now parents would be prevented from having conversations with counselors about outcomes of discipline matters? I'm sorry, I'm not getting it.
So what we believe,
Please stop my time, please stop my time, she's talking.
we did not, parents can talk to their students' counselors about anything that they wish. The counselor does not have the authority to change the outcome of a discipline infraction, and that's the way it was interpreted. So we removed the counselor and put it back on the administrator who makes the decisions. If a parent is upset about it, there's an appeal process, and it's with the administrator and not the counselor.
So that was the interpretation. Was it in actuality, were counselors making these changes?
No, counselors were not making the changes, no.
We just wanted to provide more clarity.
Thank you for that. And the other question is regarding the timeline of SB 980. I know one of the things that's always been talked about with the SR&R, we have a drop dead date for printing and all of the things. How does that work with your timetable if you don't have a final language until late, potentially?
So the SR&R, and I'd have to find the precise language for you, but the SR&R does permit us to change the regulation as needed based upon regulatory guidance or things that come up. So it does allow us to change it and provide guidance to schools if it happens 2-3 months from now.
All righty, thank you. Mr. Foster? More time?
So, good afternoon. I want to make sure I understand the question before.
It's on.
It's on, is that better? Yeah. I want to make sure that I understand the question before I answer it. So, as I understand the question, it is under House Bill number 1961, is this a ban on cell phones, or does the language of that code section give the ability of a local school division to restrict or regulate, but not have an outright ban? Is that the question?
Essentially, and it's saying what needs to be happening from bell to bell. Is it nothing, or is there flexibility therein,
So I do.
outside of those student groups that are named?
I do think that the language of the code section as it currently exists does give local school divisions the flexibility. I don't read it to require an outright ban, because it talks about restrict at line 24. And restrict is not a ban. You can restrict something and not ban it. And then again, at line 27, it talks about regulating. Right. So,
Please, keep going.
So I think those two points that I just referred to, I do think local school divisions, including this one, do have the authority under the current language to regulate but not ban.
Okay, so then we don't have to, so essentially, our regulation could end up being usage all throughout the day.
I don't know if that would be a regulation, but I do think that it gives boards flexibility, or school systems flexibility.
So we would have flexibility for, again, all throughout the day.
I think that you would have flexibility, yes.
So what's the difference between what we have currently? What's the teeth of this legislation then? If it's saying you can do whatever you wish throughout the day?
Yeah, I don't read it to be saying you can do whatever you wish throughout the day, but I do read it to say that school divisions, they don't have to impose an outright ban, that they can have something that is a restriction, but less than that.
And it could have a restriction or must have a restriction?
Dr. Anderson, I just asked Mr. Foster to take a look at it a few moments ago. I do want to say that it's, I believe that they're talking about developmentally appropriate restrictions, so I don't believe that the intent was to allow anything to go. I believe there was an intent to provide some level of monitoring or restriction that was developmentally appropriate.
Thank you. And I think what I'm trying to get to, if we were to decide that at the high school level, it is developmentally appropriate to not have restrictions on the cell phones, would that meet the tenor of what we would like? If we were to say we'll just restrict it, let's say it's at lunch and not throughout the rest of the day, would that meet the law standards?
So yeah, I think my immediate reaction is no. I think that what the code section envisions is restriction on use, but as we've talked about, I do think that given that each local school division in this Commonwealth has local control over its school system, that there is some flexibility in how that restriction is implemented.
Thank you. I don't think I'm any clearer, but I appreciate it. I know it was completely last minute.
Okay, thank you. Let's go back to taking the consensus after Dr. Anderson's questions. So I'm going to take an informal consensus of the board to help inform staff in advance of the May 8 board vote.
Thank John, if I could say.
Wait, may I,
oh,
before you do, I'm sorry, but I appreciate data, I appreciate survey data, I appreciate information, but without them knowing what question was asked on this, without them knowing what the interpretation of the law is, I feel a little uncomfortable having sort of, I hate to say this, hearsay, right? Because so I would just rather based on the information you've provided so far, unless they're here that we can ask them questions, that would be fine. If you had a panel like you've had before in work sessions of, principals from the principal associations that we could then ask more questions, I think it's a consensus of the board. It's not a formal vote. I don't know why we need all that information
Okay,
here.
can we, Dr. King, go ahead and speak, please?
Okay, I just wanted to say that prior to the bill being passed, our recommendation was to allow high school students to use their phones during lunch and between classes, because the high school principal said that if we restrict in between classes, it's going to be very difficult for them to enforce. And so I wanted, before you took the consensus, I wanted to provide that additional information because the principals did say that.
Thank you. So I'm going to, just in the interest of time, I know there's two more go-backs here, but just in the interest of time, let's move forward with this. And it's not a binding vote, it's a consensus, and this law did just come down, and obviously there's a lot of questions. So all those who prefer the staff's previous recommendation that would continue to allow high school students to use cell phones during lunch and passing periods, by show of hands, is there a consensus? For lunch and passing periods? Oh, okay, Ms. Marin, yes, Ms. Dixit, yes, Mr. Moon, yes, Mr. Carl, yes, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, yes, Mr. McDaniel, yes, Ms. Anderson, yes, myself, yes. Is all those opposed? Oh, I go to the second option now? Okay, I'm sorry, okay, so there is a consensus. All those who prefer the updated staff recommendations for bell-to-bell bans at all levels, including high school. So we have a show of hands in terms of a consensus. And then I'm going to go back to the next go-backs. Is that the process here? Okay. So Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Mr. Moon, I'm sorry. Mr. Moon, you're second.
Yeah, I didn't get to ask my follow-up questions because I ran out of time on how to enforce this. So what is your expectations once we adopt new SR&R, new cell phone policy of teachers in the classroom when teachers see violations?
So it's our expectation that each principal determine how they're going to enforce the rules at their school, right? People are doing different things. A principal showed me a cart that they have set up, that their security is going around from class to class when a teacher notifies the main office. The main office notifies security. The security goes and confiscate a phone if they need to. So
each school is going to have its own way of handling enforcement by starting from teachers. Is that
if it happens in the classroom, it has to start with teachers, right?
Oh,
There's
the
minimal,
teachers.
right? I think that the law is asking us not to have teachers intervene back and forth with students, and principals know that, and in the pilot program, they proved that they could do that.
and you don't have any intention to give certain, let's say,
A strategy?
guideline as how to handle it by all teachers?
Right, Mr.
Rather
Moon,
than each school developing its own and look different from one school to another?
I think the expectation of our school leaders are to enforce all infractions of the SR&R in their schools, and we're expecting our principals to be able to do so. We will often offer office hours with Deanna's team to support principals when they're having issues of enforcing any rules of SR&R, and we're going to expect the same thing with cell phones.
Okay, since I still got some time, one thing that I am trying to avoid is this. Teacher A just letting go of violations versus teacher B reporting everything, dutifully, and school A's culture being this versus school B's culture being different. That's what I'm trying to avoid.
Yeah. Mr. Moon, I understand and respect what you're saying, and the expectation is for our principals to uphold all rules in the SR&R. When there's violations of dress code, some teachers see it, some teachers don't, but the expectation is that they all do, right? And we will continue to work with our principals who might have challenges in enforcing any rule of SR&R like we've done.
Thank you.
Ms. Sizemore Heiser.
Thank you. Just two quick points. First, I want to pick up my colleague, Ms. Anderson, talking about the next steps versus board recommendations. And Dr. Reed, I just wanted to get clear because this is a slippery slope. If we start making changes based on conversation at the table versus next steps, is that going to be going forward for all work sessions and all topics? You can stop my time. Thank you.
So are you referring to the consensus vote?
No, in the presentation, there are certain changes that were recommended based on board conversation at the last SR&R
I
meeting.
understand.
And those weren't embedded and voted on in the next steps, or consensus wasn't given on the next steps process. So is that going to be a new change that from now on at work sessions, we may make changes based on staff recommendations, based on board conversations versus next steps? And if
No,
so, we
ma'am.
should get rid of next steps.
No, ma'am, that was an error. We're not going to, that won't continue.
Thank you. And I appreciate the willingness to be collaborative and take our feet. I totally appreciate that. So please, I just want to be clear what our process is.
Yes, ma'am.
The other thing I wanted to mention is the findings from the pilot. I was a little confused because I appreciate the finding that it clearly shows there's a bigger impact of the pouches at middle school than high school, but the pilot was only August 19th to September 30th. And then there's a statement later on that said that there was, that in the next slide, that there was less, or somewhere they said there was less enforcement, like it was less beneficial later on, but I don't see any data about later on. It said the pouches and implementation strategies were more effective early, but became less effective later, but we only seem to have data for a month and a bit. I'm curious why we don't have data for longer.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. King, does the team have some data, Deanna?
Yes, certainly. So we provided findings from the pilot in terms of the data just for a certain time period that coincided with the reporting that went out. However, the pilot, of course, extended for the entire year. And if we are interested in cell phone data after this January 31 deadline, we're happy to provide that.
I appreciate that. I think what this goes to, what tells me is that, especially at the high school level, it's a matter of really consistent implementation, which is what we said from when we passed these rules 3 years ago, that if we can support our teachers and principals in ensuring that consistent and have expectations of consistent implementation, I think storage clearly shows that it helps, right? And I think it's important to allow the schools to use storage methods if they need to or want to, absolutely. And I fully believe in not having cell phones in classes. All the data and research I've read points to the impact, negative impact of cell phones in the classroom. So I'm fully in support of that, but I just think we need to continue to work on that consistent enforcement with protections for students who need them.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And I believe that's everybody, so we're going to, unless there's any other comments, last call. So, okay.
Just one last comment, just as an FYI, because we know one of the authors of this bill is Senator Pekarsky, and I've just been texting with her just to say, is this a restriction or is this a ban? Just trying to get some understanding. And she said, can you just share this? I actually texted her. I said, no, just email it to us. But since you asked last comment, here it is. Please tell Dr. Reed you spoke with me, and the intention is the same as the executive order. And 140 in the legislature, many top lawyers undertook what that meant. We don't want to see cell phones during the school day anymore. And there's some more stuff, but it's not as germane.
Okay. Words matter. Anyway, with that, thank you, staff, and we'll be back after lunch.
And we want to squeeze out every last minute possible for us to digest all of this good information. So Dr. Reed, do you have an introduction for Go 5? Dr. Reed, do you have an introduction? We are starting.
My apologies, Dr. Anderson. So it's my pleasure this afternoon as we explore Goal 5 of our strategic plan to introduce members of our senior leadership team who will be presenting our Goal 5 report. I want to be clear that the Goal 5 report in particular really involves the 4 offices that are in front of you, our equity office, our academic office, and our schools office, as well as our strategy office work on these goals. I think one of the reasons you see the data that you see is because we're working across departments, and that's a critical strategy in terms of moving the dial on the data that we're moving the dial on. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Neal at this point to have folks introduce themselves and then make the presentation. So thank you, Dr. Anderson.
Well, I am joined by Dr. King, Dr. Presidio, Ms. Hunstead, and Dr. Ponce, and I'm going to have Ms. Hunstead kick us off this afternoon.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Today is our final goal report for this school year. Our objectives for today are seen on the screen. We look forward to talking about our progress around Goal 5 and the actions we are taking to meet our 2030 goals. Today's presentation is our Leading for Tomorrow's Innovation goal. There are 8 measures in Goal 5, and today we'll be focused on measures C through G. This presentation will be looking at graduation equity as part of our initial priority areas. We are defining graduation equity as all students graduating from FCPS with a plan and a way to demonstrate their qualifications for post-secondary success. To understand graduation equity, we looked at several factors, including rates of on-time graduation and student dropout, the diplomas our graduates are earning, our students plan for additional education or work after graduation, and college enrollment. We also share student performance in 9th grade as an indicator of whether students are on track to graduate. Starting with the big picture first, overall, about 95% of our students graduated on time last year, which is the sum of the teal, yellow, and dark blue bars. Our rates of on-time graduation are slightly higher than the state average and nearly identical to other districts in Northern Virginia. Approximately 62% of our students in the class of 2024 graduated with an advanced studies diploma, the teal bar. An additional 31% graduated with a standard diploma, the yellow bar. And less than 2% earned the applied studies diploma, the dark blue bar. Our students earned the advanced studies diploma at higher rates when compared to the state overall and other Northern Virginia divisions. Compared to baseline, we saw increases in on-time graduation and improvements in dropout rates, with the greatest improvements in these areas where the gaps were the largest. We met our overall targets this year and are on track for our overall 2030 goals. However, we will need to provide additional support to ensure all student groups meet the 2030 goal. To achieve our 2030 goals, we are pursuing a number of strategies, which we will discuss in detail following review of the data. Before we dive into the data of this presentation, I wanted to take a few moments to talk about why graduation equity is a key priority for our division and what factors have been shown to affect success in other districts. Graduation equity is a culmination of many of our earlier efforts, including supporting continuous growth of students and their learning in earlier grades, ensuring students are engaged in school and attending regularly, and facilitating student access to and success in advanced courses. Successful completion of high school is required for approximately 94% of jobs and necessary for admission into most colleges, universities, trade schools, and apprenticeship programs. Researchers have identified several factors across school districts that affect graduation, including those at a division, school, and family level. First, we're going to look at our on-time graduation data. On-time graduation rates are calculated based on the percent of students in a graduating class who have earned a standard, advanced study, or applied studies diploma. For most students, this means graduating within 4 years of entering 9th grade. Students with disabilities and our multilingual learners are able to extend time to graduation and are moved into their intended graduating class for the purpose of calculating this data. On this slide, you can see that our rate of on-time graduation was slightly higher than the state average and in line with other districts in Northern Virginia. Our class of 2024 achieved a higher rate of on-time graduation than the two prior classes, which was a similar trend in other divisions. Overall, our on-time graduation increased about 0.5 percentage point from baseline, and we met our overall target for the year. Multilingual learners and Hispanic students have lower on-time graduation rates. However, both groups saw the most growth from baseline, which suggests we are also closing the gap in graduation rates across our student groups. As a reminder, our annual targets are based on the growth that we need to achieve each year to remain on course for our 2030 goals. The growth rate for all of our students is shown by the dark blue line. Rates of on-time graduation increased by 10 percentage points for students classified as ELP levels 1 and 2. These groups now have rates much closer to the division average, and we anticipate that a sustained focus will continue to improve their rates. Students who were classified as ELP level 4 had a rate of on-time graduation that was similar to the overall division rates. And formal multilingual learners have a rate of on-time graduation that exceeded the division average at over 97%. Students with disabilities, categorized as level 2, had an on-time graduation rate that was slightly below the rates for students with disabilities overall and about 7 percentage points below students with disabilities categorized as level 1. On the data points we have used to ensure students are on track for graduation is students earning 5 or more credits by the end of 9th grade. Based on national research and our own analysis of this data, this indicator is a reliable predictor for on-time graduation, but is less reliable for some student groups, in particular for our multilingual learners. We plan to refine our model for future reports to account for these differences when examining early risk factors for on-time graduation. While not part of our strategic plan metrics, we are also monitoring changes to the state accountability system, including how graduation will be measured and reported within this system. We want to spend a few minutes looking at the 4-year and 6-year Federal Graduation Indicator, or FGI, which is part of our new state school performance and support framework. The 4-year FGI looks at the percent of students who earned a standard or advanced studies diploma within 4 years of entering high school. It does not adjust for students who move to a different graduating class to accommodate extended time to graduate. It also does not include students who graduate with the applied studies diploma. Beginning with this school year, the 4-year FGI will be used by Virginia as part of calculating a school's accountability score. It will account for 15% of a high school's final score and 10% of a secondary school's. The state will also report on the 6-year FGI. This measure looks at the percent of students who earn any of the 3 diplomas within 6 years of entering high school. This 6-year FGI does not move students into different graduating classes to accommodate extended time to graduate. This measure will count for 5% of a high school's or secondary school score in the accountability framework. On this slide, you can see the impact of using 4-year FGI rate compared to an on-time graduation rate. The rate is 3 to 4 percentage points lower when using the FGI compared to the on-time graduation rate for FCPS, Virginia, and other districts in Northern Virginia. The 6-year FGI is closer to our on-time graduation rate. While we do not yet have the 6-year rate for 23-24 and 21-22, the most recent year for which we have complete data, our 6-year FGI was 93% compared to our on-time graduation rate of 94%. This change in reporting will be most visible at schools and divisions where more students who take an extended time to graduate or earned an applied studies diploma. I will now turn the presentation over to Ms. Neal.
Okay, as a part of graduation equity, we are also going to look at students who dropped out. And generally, this includes our students who withdrew from a school without transferring to another school, or students who had an unconfirmed status at the end of the cohort year. So unlike the previous data where we were looking for the lines to go up, in this, we're looking for reduction in the rates declines to show improvement. Overall, there was a decline in student dropout rates at the state level for FCPS and for other divisions in Northern Virginia, which mirrors our changes that we saw in those on-time graduation rates. And our student dropout rates are similar to other divisions in Northern Virginia and slightly better than the state. Last year, we saw improvements in dropout rates across multiple student groups, with the largest improvements observed for student groups who had the higher rates of dropouts. So similar to on-time graduation rates, we're starting to see that gap close. Again, this slide shows our intended trajectory in order to hit our 2030 goals. And similar to what we saw in the on-time graduation rates, as we see the ELP levels increase, we see fewer dropouts. So we can see some very large improvements for our students who are classified as ELP 1 level last year. And in spite of these large improvements, over half of the students with this categorization did drop out last year. Whereas when we look at students classified as ELP level 4, they had a dropout rate that was similar to the overall division average. And our former multilingual learners had a rate of dropout that was lower than the division average. This slide provides some additional context around the 567 students who dropped out from the class of 2024. Approximately 3/4 of the students who dropped out were categorized as current multilingual learners, and about 2/3 were 18 or older at the time of withdrawal. And this data really indicates a need to continue to focus on transition and support of our high school multilingual learners, especially those students who are classified as ELP level 1 at age 18 and beyond. So in our next section, we're going to take a look at the diploma types that our graduates are earning. So overall, roughly 2/3 of our graduates earn a standard diploma, and about 1/3 earn the, 2/3 earn the advanced studies diploma, and about 1/3 earn the standard diploma. Fewer than 2% of our students earn the applied studies diploma, and this represents about 13% of our students with disabilities in the graduating cohort. And this pattern of distribution is pretty consistent with the baseline as well. We don't see these big shifts in this data. When we look a little deeper, we do see differences in diploma outcomes when we look by student group, and this was very similar to the baseline, and that data is also in the full report. You may recall in last year's work session, we did not set targets on diploma types as we wanted to ensure students were pursuing the diploma that most closely aligned with their interest and their post-secondary goals. For some of our students, that is the advanced studies diploma. For other students, that may be a standard diploma or an applied studies diploma. It is important to note that we have many students who make an intentional choice to pursue the standard diploma over an advanced studies diploma when there is alignment with those post-secondary goals, and that the advanced studies diploma is not a requirement for college admissions. We did set a target as a part of our Goal 4 measure around academically intense course taking to allow us to track whether students are prepared for post-secondary education independent of the specific diploma that they earn. If there was an interest, however, in setting targets on diploma types, one option that we've explored is to measure the extent to which our students who plan to attend a four-year college are earning the advanced studies diploma. So you can see on this slide, last year, 85% of our seniors who plan to go to a four-year college also earn the advanced studies diploma. And we do see differences between student groups when we look at this data. There are some benefits and limitations to setting a target on this. One potential benefit to a target on this is we'd be able to identify and address potential gaps between students' plans and their preparation. Adopting this measure, a potential drawback, could unintentionally signal to our students and families that the advanced studies diploma is an expectation for four-year college. If we do add this measure and set targets, we would expect that our students who are planning to attend a four-year college would be earning an advanced studies diploma. And an alternative to setting a target here would be to continue to focus on the targets that we set as a part of our Goal 4, which would be ensuring that all of our students have that academic rigor that makes them ready for post-secondary education regardless of the specific diploma type. And so this is something we look forward to getting some feedback from the board on today. Finally, we're going to take a look at the outcomes of our students after they leave FCPS. So we know for our students to be successful after graduation, they benefit from having a clear idea and a plan of what they want to do immediately after graduation. And among our students who completed the senior survey last year, 99% had a post-secondary plan, which was a rate that was similar across all of our student groups. The majority of our seniors responding to the senior survey indicated their plan was to enroll in college. And our student self-reported plans remain relatively unchanged when we look year over year compared to the baseline as well. But we did see a slight uptick in the percent of students who plan to pursue education outside of that traditional 2 or 4 year pathways, such as training or apprenticeship programs. In addition to monitoring the plan students are self-reporting, we also have access to data on college enrollment through the National Student Clearinghouse. And the Clearinghouse provides us data on college enrollment for the vast majority of students who are enrolled in 2 and 4 year programs. It doesn't have the ability to track military enlistment, work, or apprenticeship programs or other educational outcomes. On this slide, you can see state-reported Clearinghouse data that provides information on enrollment in college within 16 months of earning a federally recognized diploma. This is data the state tracks year over year. As you can see on the slide, 79% of our students who graduated from the class of 2023, and that's the most recent set of data because it's a 16-month lookout, met that criteria. When we compare ourselves to the state and other divisions in Northern Virginia, our overall college-going rates were higher, and we had especially high rates of college-going amongst multiracial students, Black students, and boys relative to these other divisions. We also recognize that the college-going rates vary across student groups, with our Hispanic and multilingual learners having lower rates of college enrollment. So finally, we're going to take a look at the work we're doing focused on our strategic efforts to improve graduation equity for all of our students. Last year, we saw significant improvements, and we attribute these to a couple of things. First of all, having consistent structures and systems in place in our schools that use data to identify students who are at risk and to provide personalized support to ensure that students are successful. Second, having division-wide structures and systems in place that provide additional oversight and support to our schools where we see higher levels of need. Third, we had our division-wide efforts that we focused on with student attendance last year that resulted in large improvements in our rates of chronic absenteeism. And if you'll remember our Goal 2 report, in particular, we saw those improvements for our seniors. And then fourth, our growth for our multilingual learners, again, where we saw those double-digit gains that we reported as a part of our Goal 1 report this year. So we've tried something new with these slides. We've tried to separate out, calling out our strategies that are new and some of our continued actions. And we certainly continue to modify efforts based on the areas of need that we see in this data and other data we examine. And I'm going to highlight a few of the actions within these strategies, and there's more details in the full report. So our first strategy is focused on schools using tools and dashboards to identify and track risk, which allows us to respond with interventions based on the individual student needs. So one example, our schools use our on-time graduation dashboard to look at those students who are at risk of not graduating. They then work with students and families to develop personalized graduation plans to help get them back on track. So one option that's available to help students get back on track is our credit recovery programs, which may be offered during non-school hours, like in the evenings, online, or in the summer. Our second strategy, again, is focusing on continuing to provide additional targeted supports at schools where we've identified greater need. So one example of this is our on-time graduation resource teachers that we have placed at 9 high schools throughout FCPS, and they support students who are at risk or have dropped out of school to make sure that those students re-engage either with that school or enroll in another school. And the data over time, which is on page 31 of the full report, does show the impact of placing these resources in schools with higher need. Third, over the past few years, we've had an intentional focus on strategies to keep students engaged with school and focused on what they want to do after they graduate. So in Goal 2, for example, we highlighted the importance of developing individualized plans in collaboration with families to ensure consistent attendance and to address any barriers to students coming to school. Another action that sits under this strategy is the collective efforts to expose and prepare students to the full range of post-secondary opportunities available. And some of these strategies are in place for all of our students, such as our work with ABLE, where we're going to be looking at identifying opportunities to expand academic readiness, post-secondary readiness, while others are more targeted, such as our work with our career and transition services that supports our students with IEPs in their transition to post-secondary. Our fourth strategy focuses on the appropriate use of credit accommodations for our students with IEPs or 504 plans, including the increased awareness and access to these credit accommodations. These accommodations provide greater access to the standard and advanced studies diploma. And this school year, we saw an increase in submissions for these accommodations as a result of the outreach efforts that were done in the fall with school teams. Our fifth strategy is focused on scheduling and academic advisement practices. And as a part of the broader work to strengthen academic advisement practices, we are making sure that the process for conducting and using course audits is consistent across schools. And these course audits ensure students are enrolling in the appropriate courses each year, which may be particularly impactful for our students who are at risk of not graduating on time. And then finally, we've identified a number of opportunities to improve outcomes that our goal innovation teams will further explore, including refining predictive data sets so that we make sure that we're flagging early which students might be at risk, increasing the use of graduation plans, as we know this is a strategy that's working, strengthening our transition supports for students who are new to FCPS and those who are transitioning to some of our non-traditional school programs, ensuring that we have alignment of our resources, and further investigating and removing any non-academic barriers to graduating on time. And then as we conclude our final goal report to the board this year, I think it's important to note the interconnectedness of the 5 goals in our strategic plan. Graduation equity in many ways relies on success of our other goals, including students having a strong start no matter when they begin their journey with us in FCPS. Our students having a sense of belonging in their schools that leads to that positive school engagement, that foundation of early learning that supports subsequent academic success, and the ability to access a broad range of opportunities that support pre-K to 12 success and prepare our students for the rapidly changing future. So this concludes our Goal 5 report, and I will turn it over to our meeting managers.
Thank you very much. We see one placard up, but I know you are all digesting the information, and so we will start with Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. Go to slides 19 and 20. One of the concerns that I think many on this board have had since the new state accountability and accreditation standards have come forward is the idea that students who exercise their rights, multilingual learners, special education students who exercise their rights under federal law to have more time before graduation would be penalized, their schools would be penalized for respecting those rights. This seems to imply, the language found on slide 19 seems to imply that students who are getting an applied studies diploma or taking longer than 4 years would not count in the state's counting of this. Are they excluded permanently from that? Or when, let's say that they complete their advanced or standard diploma at a point later, are they then added into the school's calculation?
I'm going to defer to Beatrice otherwise.
So I'll start, and then Beatrice can help out here a little bit, because Beatrice is our resident expert of all things accountability and VDOE. But I think what the main thing, I think, is what you've already summarized, which is we're no longer going to have that same flexibility in our graduation calculations for those students that we know have a legal right to take longer to graduate, and they've got an educational need to do so. And they're not going to count in the 4-year rate. they potentially would count in the 6-year rate.
But that's only for a readiness component.
Correct, correct. So Beatrice, did you want to add anything to that?
No, you captured the main points, Sloan, that, Mr. Prish just said. It is the readiness component. Only 5% of the points are in that 6-year rate. The on-time graduation rate that we looked at as well, that does include applied studies, will continue to be reported as a transparency measure across the state to allow comparisons, but again, won't be part of accountability. So there's a bit of a mixed message that we're seeing.
So at least we'll know how many families are being screwed over by the state. We just won't be able to count their success as our school's success. So just to be clear one more time, federal law guarantees as a right for multilingual learners and certain special education students to take longer to complete high school, take longer in high school. And the new state standard is only counting standard and advanced studies diplomas within 4 years. So even students who do complete that work in the time they are allowed by federal law, they will never count towards the benefit of the school division accomplishing its task of helping those students achieve that accomplishment.
That's correct.
And can somebody maybe speak to how that penalizes a school system for the work it does on behalf of those students to never be able to present the breadth of its work?
Well, I think, what we're going to continue to do is make sure that every student and family that falls into that category that would have that right to stay with us longer, and it's through the year that they turn 22, understands what rights they have and the benefits that they have to be able to do that. So we're going to communicate that very vigorously and continue to work and support those families. But what it does is it gives an unfair public perception of the work that we're doing, right? So the public is never going to see the benefits and the successes that our school system has provided to those students and families. The only thing that, well, I don't know about the only thing, but we can continue to do our own internal calculations and share that information publicly. We can continue to advocate at the state and federal level as part of our legislative package that that's something that we think needs to be changed in terms of the graduation rate. But other than that, we're really on our own in terms of carrying the message forward about the work that we're doing. We're not going to get support from the state with that.
Well, I would advocate that when we do these reports going forward, that we are informing the public about where we actually stand as it relates to all of our students. And to be clear, are the schools penalized then for the percentage of students they have in a school that do not complete graduation in 4 years with those diplomas?
Well, they're going to be penalized in the sense that their graduation rates are not going to be as high, and that's going to be part of the school performance.
So they're still
and
part of the
supporting.
N.
Right, right,
So all around, we're being disadvantaged.
correct.
And the only benefit for accreditation standards is in helping these students achieve this applied studies and then eventual standard or advanced diploma in their 6-year or, until they're up to 22, would be that we get it on the back end and the readiness component, which is only a third as large as the graduation component.
That's right.
All right. So that's probably pretty complicated for a lot of people to digest. I hope that as we present this at the board meeting in the future, that we can contextualize this specific thing, because it's a big deal. And it's going to impact different schools in different ways. And in our school system, I think we've gone, thanks to the advocacy by some board members, we've gone to great lengths to explain the differences in the types of diplomas that are being achieved and what the benefits and disadvantages are there and how we can continue to grow those students. And we need to tell the public that we're being penalized as a result by the state.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. Ms. Anderson?
I want to flip over, although I definitely want us to unpack that that conversation a little bit. I wanted to flip over to slide 36 if we could. I had a conversation with Miss Lady before she went out of town, and I definitely had a similar question. So within my professional world, we talk about placement quite a significant amount for the graduates from the program that I work with. And so I understand, first of all, the problems with getting the information related to placement. But the other question I have is this a look at 16 months to see whether or not students are still enrolled? Or is this a look to see within 16 months if they've been enrolled in school at any time?
I believe it is the within, but I will double check on that. Dr. Presidio?
We'll triple check on it, but my understanding is for sure that this is the look at 16 months, that initial enrollment, but we also have the continuation of enrollment and how many students actually graduate. So there's more information in the National Student Clearinghouse. We were just looking at the enrollment in post-secondary education at this particular slide.
Because my question really is whether or not this is a snapshot view at 16 months, because as a former college instructor, I can tell you lose a lot of kids in that first year, and the colleges aim to do that, to weed out certain students that aren't prepared or maybe come back at a later date to go to school. There are lots of reasons why even to be at 79% within the 16 months is still very high for FCPS students, and I want us to actually talk about that a little bit more. So
No, you're raising some really good points. I would say, and we could get the additional data in terms of graduation on time. We're a little bit above national averages. We're not significantly above national averages for graduating within 4 to 6 years. One of the biggest factors, in addition to the ones that you mentioned, though, for students to graduate on time is financial burden, right? A lot of families, a lot of students aren't able to complete for financial reasons, and so that's difficult, and that's another reason to track that data.
And this is pulling, I assume, pulling students at community colleges and
2
outside
and
of the
4 year.
state?
Yeah, public
Okay.
and private, yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not 100% of all 2 and 4 year colleges across the country. I think it's 98%. So there's some that are missing because they don't participate in the National Student Clearinghouse, but it's like 98% of 2 and 4 year colleges, public and private, that are participating in this data set.
Okay, so then my second question is, are we doing anything as a division, other than utilizing data that we're receiving? Are we doing anything as a division to track our students after they leave us?
We have, let me ask Jen if you could help me with that. I don't know that we have any other follow-up surveys after the senior survey in the senior year, do we?
We have the required indicators from VDOE, but other than that, we do not have additional ways to track our students after graduation.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Heiser.
Thank you, and I have a lot to unpack here. I appreciate all your time and effort on this report. Probably need like 6 go-backs, so just put me down for those. The first thing I wanted to start was kind of a big picture comment on the report. And I have to say, I love this theory of graduation equity. I think this is phenomenal. But I look at slide 6, because it's something I think I and others on the board have been talking about. It's not just getting kids out the door, but making sure they're actually set up for success when they leave. And so that's what this graduation equity seems to go to. They have a plan and a way to demonstrate qualifications for post-secondary success. I love this. However, I don't see this report actually giving me sufficient data or most data on this topic. Because the report, and I understand that the data may not be there, we may have to gather it, and that would be fine, except I don't see that narrative in here of we recognize these are the pieces we still need to report on, here's how we're getting there, right? But one thing I've talked about for a long time is I understand the importance of on-time graduation, state requirement, federal requirement. However, it doesn't really show us if our students are ready for post-secondary success. And when you look at the data of how many students start colleges and leave college, it kind of shows that maybe some is financial, but some aren't. So I would love to see, Dr. Reed, a little more intentionality around students graduating with a plan. I know we do the student success survey, and one of the questions I have on the slide on the success survey, which is somewhere between 36 and 38, it talks about asking the students, but it doesn't give a percentage of how many students responded. Because that percentage is a percentage of the students who responded to the survey, not a percentage of all seniors, because we have to take out the ones that didn't respond. So I would be curious to know, and maybe it's not much, maybe a lot of them responded, but I'd be curious to know what the actual percentage of plans are of those who responded, as opposed to thinking those are all seniors. right? Like, it just, like, percentage of seniors reporting post-secondary plans, but how many percentage of seniors did the report? And then out of those that did the report, how many reported post-secondary plans?
So, thank you for that question. I think what the team tried to do is put the N, for example, a baseline, and then for the 23-24, because that's the most recent data we have, 99% of seniors reported having a plan, and that would be 13,577 out of 13,695. So that's the number who did.
But that's my question. Are those the number of graduating seniors or the numbers who reported?
I think it's both.
Well, that's my question. I'm just not clear, right? Which one is it? And
Okay,
that's-
so Ms. Neal,
Yep, we had about 460 students who did not complete the senior survey, to your question.
out of
Ms. Sizemore-Hosek.
about 14,000.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's helpful to know, and that's what was one of my first questions. But I think goes to this point of, I don't see a lot of indicators here knowing our students are ready to be successful when they leave. Like, on-time graduation isn't necessarily an indication of success especially when you put in the applied studies diploma and all these state requirements. So I would just love to see, we've talked about executive function concerns, we've talked about I would just love to see some of those things infused into this report. So we're really looking more holistically at what is it that we're measuring to see that our students are ready to be successful. I think these are really important data points, but I feel like we're constantly talking about absenteeism and on-time graduation, important, but we need to get to the next piece of it, which is the data around ready to be successful. And I'll go back for all my other points, but just I want to put that out there, something to think about.
Thank you. Ms. St. John Cunning.
Thank you. Thank you. I kind of wanted to piggyback on this when we talk about the definition of what post-secondary plans are. And do we have or track post-secondary plans that do not include going to college, but maybe some of our students that are in our CTE programs that are in internships or are being employed? Because I didn't see any of that data here.
Yeah, we do. If on page 24 of the full report, it gives a little bit more of a breakdown of what the specific plans are that students had. And so the categories we have are intent to go to college, plan to work or enlist, plan to pursue other education. And the full survey, we can break it down further to say, was it 2-year college, was it 4-year college?
Okay, and I just want to shed light on our great career and technical education programs, where a lot of our kids are going into internships or getting jobs straight out of high school where they're earning $80,000 a year. And this is really important for some of our students and families that come from, financially disadvantaged homes, where they may need that job in that position. And then from what I understand, in a lot of these programs, eventually, the employer will pay for higher education. Do we have any of that data? I just think we're shortchanging the work that we actually do with some of our students that don't immediately pursue a university or college degree. And I know that some of these kids are doing amazing work because of the amazing work that they're getting from the career and technical education programs that we have in our schools. And I really think we need to highlight that and focus on that and show that success as well.
I don't know that we currently have data that we could report on that, but it sounds like understanding for our students who are going straight into the workforce, who's going in there with a credential, right? Some of the things that you're raising up that have come through our CTE programs.
I think what I would offer to that is, we could always amend the questions that we ask on the senior survey, right? Because we're dependent on the students telling us what they actually did after they leave us. Other than the National Student Clearinghouse with that 2- and 4-year data, we're really relying on student self-reporting. So if there were other data points that we wanted to collect, we could write additional questions. So we'll definitely take that feedback into consideration and perhaps write some additional questions so we'd have other or more robust sets of data that we could provide in future reports.
Thank you, because I think we're missing a really important and valuable story.
So I appreciate your advocacy for that.
Thank you. Mr. Moon?
Let's see whether I can find this slide about ELP1 data.
It's slide 15.
About graduation data for ELP.
I think it's slide 15.
I'm sorry. I didn't make that clear.
I apologize.
Yeah, what really caught my attention is such a low rate of graduation for ELP1. Is that because, I mean, they're in ELP1 as a senior. Is that?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, again, it's a troubling data point, but it's not surprising given the fact that those students do have pretty limited academic English skills.
So what are the strategies do we have to support them to continue pursuing high school diploma as opposed to dropping out?
Yeah. So again, a great question. So the things that we do now include a lot of individual case management at the schools that have larger numbers of students that would be at the lower levels of English proficiency. So a couple of years ago, we did staff an additional counselor at 10 of it's either 9 or 10 of our high schools that have larger percentages of students at the lower levels of English proficiency, because they typically are enrolling students that are maybe newer to the country or definitely newer to our school system. So they do provide a lot of individual case management and support and work with the students to understand that they do have more time. So they can stay with us again until the year that they turn 22. They can also look at other alternative educational options that we have, so they can look at enrollment in the non-traditional schools or alternative schools. Oftentimes students, one of the big reasons that students drop out is because they have other responsibilities. So we looked at the slide in here that showed the dropout rates by age, and the older the student is, the more likely they are to drop out because they've got additional responsibilities, either to their immediate family or to their extended family. So enrollment in non-traditional programs or the adult high school, so that they might be able to have more flexible scheduling and attend part-time. We work on credit acceleration opportunities for them, so trying to make technology available so that students can complete credits and try to accelerate their credit accumulation towards graduation through independent study. So, those are the things that we've typically done. I do think the biggest advantage for students that we really try to encourage them to take advantage of is not giving up and staying with us, even if it's on a part-time basis, for as long as they can. Because these are students that do make pretty rapid growth when they continue to stay enrolled in school. So trying to figure out, how to help them balance the flexibility towards financial and other personal responsibilities and their educational needs.
So when they are identified as an ELP1, as a senior, do I assume that the reason that they are placed as senior is they have other high school credits, whether from somewhere in the U.S. or where they came from, enough to be placed in senior grade level, or is them perhaps based upon their age?
Yeah, we're really talking about based on a student's age here, not grade level, because you might come into the system at age 18, right, and enroll at one of our base high schools and have no credits because you're coming from another country or you've had significant interruptions to your educational experience and be an ELP level 1 student. So those are students that we provide a lot of support to them and their families to really understand their options. And try to build an educational program that's going to work best for them. Because that is a student who's going to need to put in a minimum of 4 years of time probably, right, to be able to complete all of their graduation requirements.
I guess my question is then, why are they put in as a senior? Why are they identified as a senior if they do not have enough credits to be senior?
So I don't think that's happening. I think when I was trying to explain this, we're looking at the students that would be of age in that cohort. I could be wrong about that. Maybe this data set is actually, and I'm going to ask Rich or Beatrice to help me with that.
The students that are ELP Level 1 that are in grade 12 in this data set, many of them have been with us for a number of years, and they are still a Level 1 student. So these are not students who enter as 12th graders as a Level 1. So this is for these students, most students, like the majority of our students, make progress throughout, but this group of students may be with us for 2 years or 3 years, and they still Level 1. So we have work to do on the English language development side with this particular group of students.
I mean, one thing just to add to that too, as Rich and I were talking about this slide earlier, when we look at that ELP1, that 22%, we don't have the exact number right now, but a lot of those students most likely are duly identified students, and they're also students with disabilities, and are probably graduating with an applied studies diploma, where they have more credit accommodation flexibility.
Is it possible for us to get more detailed
We
data?
can break it down more, yeah.
Breakdown.
Yeah.
Okay, with that in mind, I wanted to share with my colleagues and superintendent and staff something that I learned from one school district when I attended a conference in Atlanta, Georgia, just a few days ago. Obviously, they did one heck of a job. That is why they are the presenter. And to the rest of us who are attending there, it's granted that they may have a different requirements. It's a different state and different demographic. However, this particular high school in California, 76.3% Hispanic, 88% poverty, 30% of parents not a high school graduate. They have 97.4% graduation rate, 91% going to college, 4.5% military and work after graduation. Those statistics really surprise me, how they were able to achieve that. I'll send you the name of that high school. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, Mr. Moon, and I think Dr. Ponce has done some really seminal work in this area with our multilingual learners, and can maybe comment about some of the changes we're making here to better meet the needs of our multilingual learners.
Right. Thank you. If you can see Mr. Moon and everybody else, we are on the right track. Like Dr. Sloan was saying, we have to be a little bit more think out of the box. And we do have some students that are multilinguals. They have been in the system. And because in the past, in name of that we like them and we keep them in the same, or teaching them something that maybe was not what they're supposed to be. So right now we have been evaluating every single one, and we are going to be a little bit more aggressive and open more opportunities for these multilingual students. Something that Sloan was saying that is reality is flexibility. We have some students that they are older than 18, and they have to start working or somehow start helping families. So rather than have a standard schools from 8, let's say 7:30 to 3 or 8 to 4, we're going to make sure that we are going to be able, that they will have no time to finalize their diploma. And we're going to be a little bit more flexible. We have been actually evaluating the system that we have right now, and we will be very soon doing some changes that will benefit our students. And especially those that are LP1, there are some credit that they can take on their own language. And this is the one that we have been thinking. You don't have to be taking in English to get some credit. And also, we had to be looking some other opportunities. Some students, when they come, they bring some credit, but because they are in Spanish maybe or any other language, then I wouldn't say that they are not taken, but it's very difficult for them to translate. So we wanted to be more intentional how we evaluate those, if they are bringing any kind of credit, and where are we going to be placing them, and which language we are going to be working with. Because there are some systems that can provide us many different ways to provide them with the right credit. So those numbers, I know that very soon we're going to be talking the same thing that you were talking about California on Fairfax.
Thank you.
Ms. Marin?
Yes, so the National Student Clearinghouse, is that something that the Federal Department of Education had run?
That's a great question. I don't think so. I'm going to ask Jen and see if she knows off the top of her head. I think that's independent from the U.S. Department of Ed, but I'm not positive.
Okay, I was just asking to wonder about
Great
the interruption
question.
of that data. Just getting back to the stipulation about 4 years of graduation, two things. One, it was on slide 21, and maybe I'm just getting a little too tired here, but the on-time graduation rate versus the 4-year graduation rate. So the on-time graduation rate is FCPS's, and the 4-year grad rate is the federal graduation indicator. Why is there a delta? Why is there a point difference there?
So the on-time graduation rate is what VDOE currently reports, and then we'll be shifting to that use of the 4-year FGI for accountability. And the difference you're seeing is the on-time graduation rate is allowing that flexibility for students who are students with disabilities and multilingual learners to have the extended time, and it's accounting for the applied studies diploma, which the 4-year FGI rate is not accounting for either of those things. So that's the delta.
Got it. Thank you. And similarly, and I appreciate Mr. Frisch's comments, but is it the case that if a student knew that they were going to need 5 years, if they declared that up front, does that alter how their data is measured or tracked? Okay. Thank you. I'd love to hear, well, I don't know. Let me wait for that. I'm wondering if, this gets back to the comments I made during Goal 3, which you're all familiar with, which is about communicating the pathways to get folks, to get the kids and the families to get students to graduation. And this relates to the coursework pathway and the work with ABLE. And this also goes to Mr. Moon's question about the strategies. Like, what strategies is this board funding, or should we fund more of, that will get more students to graduate meaningfully? And it's not just to get that number to get them out of our building, it's to get them out of our building successfully. So for instance, the course navigating work, high-impact tutoring, EduFuturo's work, dual enrollment in online courses, counselors, required lessons. So I also want to say though, like, so now we're a year into this, right? We had the baseline, like this is exciting because last year when we did this, we're like, oh my gosh, we want to see the data. Well, here it is, like this is really great. And now it's making us think about other things, but from a board perspective, I'm wondering what do we fund? And what skills do the staff need in order to make this stuff happen? And again, with the communications, I'm even wondering things like, do we offer some kind of AI tool so that if a student says, how do I enroll in a dual enrollment class? Like when you go online and you order and it's like, talk to an expert, and could there not be some things like that? I think a person is really great, in having that consistent person every year, really from the start of middle school onward, but again, like me trying to help my daughter sign up for driver's ed and summer health, no idea. And anytime, I can't figure it out, I really wonder about other people who, don't live and breathe this. So I guess I'd like to know more about the strategies, and maybe that's not for this, but when we think about developing the budget in the future, how does this translate into us ensuring that we're spending our money in the things that make our students successful when they graduate, to go to that thing, not just to get them over the finish line, but actually have that plan so that when they leave, they're successful.
I would say, Ms. Marin, that probably one of the key strategies is retaining excellent educators. And we know that the single most important influence on a student's success is the quality of the instruction they receive. So I think that you are, by putting a stake in the ground in the budget that you recently passed, saying that we want to adequately compensate our educators, our teachers in the classroom, our IAs, our principals, our support staff, so that we're able to continue to do this work well. So I think that's in every body of research. So I really appreciate the question and the opportunity to answer.
You good, Ms. Merritt? Okay, all right. I'll go next. In the strategy slide 39, it mentions targeted follow-ups and for the students for on-time graduation. How does this targeted follow-ups work, and how does it impact the outcome?
Well, I can start, and then if any of my colleagues want to jump in. I just want to stress, as Dr. Reed said at the beginning, I mean, this is a cross-departmental effort to really try to provide the supports to our schools and students that they need. I think the first thing that we did in school year 23-24 that you're seeing some results in the data is from that data tracking that we've done as a school system, looking at whether or not every individual student is on track to graduate on time or not, being able to identify the percentages of students that may be on track or off track at a particular school, following up with that school, and then having that school have the data down to the individual student. One of the things that we put in place in 23-24 was a requirement for schools to develop individualized graduation plans for students that might be off track. So the first thing with creating that plan is to have the counselor or whomever is the lead person working with that student, providing that case management support, meet with the student, meet with the family, do a credit accrual determination, find out where they might be deficient in credits, what some of their obstacles and barriers might be. If it's an attendance barrier, getting to school on time, finding a way to solve that problem. If it's a health issue or a mental health issue, finding a way to address that, that situation and that challenge that that student is facing. And that has produced really good results. That's super time-intensive work, but that's really what you have to do, is that personalized approach, that case management, student-by-student approach to get them what they need and to address the root causes of the challenges that they're having. Then finding additional ways to accelerate credits for them. One of the things that Dr. Reed supported us with when she came in was the development of our Twilight program and creating some flexible opportunities for students to work outside of the traditional school hours to make up credit. So we were able to provide resources to a number of our high schools to implement after school hours credit recovery Twilight programs, and also purchase some additional technology to help students accrue credit more quickly than they would if they had those seat time requirements of taking the course during the school day. Those are the types of things that I think are making a really big difference for our students, and we just need to continue those efforts and accelerate them as much as possible.
Yeah, that's excellent points. And because we're talking about graduation equity here, I wanted to just check in, how's the equity office working in this targeted follow-ups? How are you involved?
We have a team of equity specialists that work directly with our regions. Our regions are able to monitor the work that's happening in our schools and with our principals as they do their SIP goals and have those SIP meetings. So my team is engaged all year with schools and the regions to help support this work.
My next question is about the which schools are doing better. Is there any area, or I should say pyramid, which is showing a better results, and maybe we can see what they're doing better than other pyramids can, learn from, and also it is also again equitable, right? So when somebody's doing something good, then we all can benefit out of that. So any comments on that?
I'm going to get us started and then have Dr. Ponce lean. And I think, and we'll provide some additional data to the board as well, but I think when we've looked and seen growth for the schools where we've seen those efforts really paying off is having deeply embedded systems, as Dr. Presidio was talking about, practices where those schools are really focused in on using that data, identifying the students who need who have a need for additional support, and having systems and structures in place to provide that support for students. I think what we also see is, and this is shows up in the research as well, is a strong culture of collaboration. So teacher teams who have strong culture of collaboration, because we're looking at, the success in the classroom is leading to the success on graduation as well. So some of those are the types of systems we're seeing in place when schools are doing well with moving the needle on this. And I know Dr. Ponce wanted to add as well.
Yes, and thank you. Like Sloan was saying, we have a graduation tracker, and our OTG team is a very tedious work, but we have been working constantly. However, I know that, and I don't want to penalize and say this region is better than this or this school is better, because we have to see the whole picture. And something that I wanted to check right now, for example, and I'm going to just look at my map right now. When we talk about some pyramid, like a justice is 51% of multilinguals, and at the same time, economically disadvantaged, you see, is a 53.5. So we are talking about really high numbers, and so on. I can talk about some of the most difficult, that I would say that are more, is the highest need, Full Church, Justice, and Annandale, with the high numbers of multilinguals and equal as well. Then you have Mount Vernon, Lewis, West Potomac, and Edison, and then followed by Herndon and Westfield, and then Fairfax, Centerville. Then you have schools that are doing very well. However, you have to understand that the number of students coming, for example, multilingual, and I'm not labeling the multilinguals, but sometimes you have some students who are newcomers, which are a totally different story. Like Sloan was saying, they might come when I are already 18 with few credit, and that graduation for them is going to take a longer. And we graduate them, but sometimes it will not count toward the school when they graduate, because they take a longer time, especially now with all these changes. So it will take a little bit longer, but I believe that we are on good track. But I don't want to say names. I know you asked for schools that are doing, because I don't want to call names now, but I was just saying with those schools that have risk factors, I call risk factors, are higher than others. And we have to consider when we talk about that, about it, students.
I think what I was not asking was that which is not doing well. I was saying which is doing well, so others can take that success story and use that as a benchmark and implement in other schools. That was what I was going with it. So.
And yes, I did understand. However, what I wanted to say is that we're talking about totally different population with the different risk factors. So I cannot say this school is doing well because I'm saying then the other school is not doing well. But remember those risk factors, and I just wanted to say this.
Okay, that's understood. Is there any peer mentoring in play here again? Because students kind of sometime when they talk to somebody, their age group and somebody like them, and giving them the mentoring advice, they're more receptive to that. So is that as a part of the follow-ups and targeted approach?
So I don't know. I saw Dr. Axler move over there. I don't know if you wanted to add anything on this. Everything that I've really mentioned so far is adults working with students, but I don't know if there's anybody on the team that wants to mention anything about peer mentoring.
Sure. So as part of our MentorWorks programming, we do have some peer mentoring. We call it student mentoring because it's not always a direct peer. It could be a high schooler for an elementary schooler. So in the 23-24 school year, we had over 4,000 FCPS students participate in our MentorWorks program. A subset of those students had student mentors. The majority of them had adult mentors. We actually expanded this programming in the spring of last year and up through this year with something called the Belonging Project, which is an expansion of our MentorWorks program specifically targeting students with higher rates of chronic absenteeism so that we can use that as a way to provide connections to the school and increase regular attendance and connections in that school building.
That's amazing to hear, actually. I'm going to go for a go back, and I have Dr. Anderson next.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to try to focus my first set of questions around slide 11. So if we could put that up, please. No, I'm sorry, 31. I apologize. 31, the one that speaks about diploma types. And looking at this chart, I guess my first wondering, I'm trying for the life of me to find last year's chart, and I cannot find it, but I have a good sense of what the data is because we talked about it last time at meeting managers. But in looking at this slide, I'm just wondering, when staff reviews it, what shows up? What's the response? What resonates, Dr. Reed?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Anderson. Ms. Neal?
I mean, I think in this slide, we obviously see some differences between student outcomes in terms of who's earning our advanced studies diploma versus the standard diploma. I think this is something that we looked at in our Goal 4 report when we were looking at the continuum of rigor. One of the ways that ABLE talked about in their presentation that students increase rigor is not only taking the AP or IB or advanced coursework, but also persisting through a fourth year of math, a fourth year of science. So I think that's where you're seeing some of those differences show up. Obviously, if students are not taking advantage of those additional years of math and science as part of the ABLE work. And social studies, thank you, Sloan, give the shout out. And world languages, we'll put them all in there, that are also, there's some alignment with the advanced studies diploma.
Yes, I appreciate all of that, and I also appreciate that last year's data, this slide looked pretty similar. And what raises concern for me is that we don't have any targets in this area at all. And this is not to communicate that having an advanced diploma is what every child should have. But this disproportionality is stunning, and even when we were talking about meeting managers, like, do we not want to do anything about this? And not seeing that be part of the presentation, frankly, concerns me. So I want to say that. Secondly, I would love to hear, if we could just go back to the slide. I would like to get a sense of, is this presentation consistent across our schools? I'm not asking for the schools that are the lowest performance. I am asking, if we were to pull this data 25 times, what does it look like? Is it consistent or all over the place?
I would say it's similar. I mean, there's a range you're obviously saying, but it's similar across school to school.
So then that means it's a division problem, not a school problem. It's like in a classroom, if all of the kids fail the test, the teacher has work to do. If one of two kids, then, they have work to do. If it's similar across the entire division, then we have work to do. And I would like to get a sense of what is that work? We did hear from Dr. Bell a month or so ago regarding the course-taking patterns. I'd like to know, what is this now going to look like given that new information? What can I tell my parents that we are going to do that is going to impact this data?
Sure. So I'm going to do two things. I want to come back to this because this was something that we wanted to talk about as a follow-up to meeting managers. I think we can explore this two ways. If you look at Goal 4, what this is saying is there is a continuum of rigor, and students can continue to move along that continuum of rigor regardless of where they are in terms of their diploma types. So we have kids who are earning the advanced studies diploma who may not take math their senior year, right? Because they finish all 4 of their math credits by the time they're a junior. they can continue to move and accelerate their rigor by taking a math their senior year. So that's independent of a diploma type. You have students who are earning a standard diploma who are also earning a score of 10 or higher on that ABLE that can continue to deepen additional courses in math or science without necessarily earning the advanced studies diploma. So I think we have that goal that's going to really focus on those individual conversations with students to make sure they are taking coursework that is preparing them for post-secondary. What we tried to do in this slide is to honor that students are making some decisions about the coursework they're taking that aligns with their post-secondary goals. So we looked only at our students who said they want to go on to a four-year college and see differences in this data between the percentages of students who are saying they want to go on to a four-year college and those students who are earning an advanced studies diploma. So our recommendation is, if the board wants to set a target on this, to focus in here, because that's honoring trying to align students' intended plans with coursework that would be most aligned with that post-secondary readiness.
Thank you. Even with that subset of students that we're looking at, the disparity is still stunning. We have the lowest is 48%, the highest is 92%. I don't think this is the representation that we want to have for our division. The other question that I have is regarding the intersectionality. When we have, I imagine you, by we I mean you, when you have looked at this data, because it's not part of this, it wasn't the baseline. We had more intersectionality data, but I don't see it as present in this year's reports. What are the findings, since I don't know? I'd like to ask.
With regard to diploma type, I think the group that we tend to see the outcomes be most different from overall, and not specific to this slide, but just in general, are students who are duly identified as students with an IEP and students who are multilingual learners.
Right, and we also have our Black students who are not doing well, and not all of them have the language issues, and so those tend to be less. So when you have that intersectionality, I'm just going to focus on that group for right now, because it's the one that I can take out some other variables. What does it look like when I have to put myself on a go back. What does it look like for those students?
On this specific data or on
Specific data set, let's just take that.
So I don't think we have explored it for this specific data set because we put this data together relatively quickly to have a board conversation.
I'm sorry, the slide before.
The slide before. I need to look and see if we have that information in the report, Dr. Anderson. I'm sure we've pulled it. I'm just not sure if we put it in the full report.
Dr. Anderson, would you like to go back? Yes, I would.
Dr. Anderson, could I just add a little bit to that discussion? And I know this isn't perfect, and we're only in our second year of required implementation. But through the advisory program, we are working to require every student to have a 4-year academic and career plan. And that plan has annual goals and activities for the advisors to work with the students in their advisory to have these kinds of conversations to really, push students to achieve their best. And I think when we look at some of these data sets, for me, one of the things I worry about is different expectations for different groups of students. One of the things I worry about is, counselors that have caseloads of 450 students being able to provide that personalized support and attention, the lack of the ability to maybe have as much time with students as they would like to have. That advisory section, I think, plays a really important role because now you've got one teacher who's working with 20 kids who can have those individual conversations, have those connections, get the information home that maybe hasn't been coming home when we've tried to do some of these things in different ways before. So I do think that's a strategy that we're really trying to lean into. It's not perfect yet. Teachers are still trying to figure out how to do that in addition to all of their other instructional responsibilities. But I do think it's something that's going to make a difference.
I'm at a disadvantage because I can't respond because my time is up, but I'll make a note.
Can I also share? I'd like to share. I think that the most exciting thing to me about our ABLE work is that it pulls the curtains out and gives schools direct data about their students. But I also think that also with what Sloan was saying about people talking to our students, that we need to take it back to the middle schools to start having those conversations about what are your hopes and dreams for our students, right? So that they can start, when they have less pressure around guiding our students, right? When they get to high school, there's a lot of things happening, but the middle school counselors can help in this process by starting to have those conversations about what does it look like to go to college. I remember when I left Fairfax for a couple of years and joined another system, I had a conversation with a student about college, and she was in 11th grade, and she told me that this was the first time somebody ever talked to her about going to college when she was in the 11th grade. And sometimes our students just don't know what they don't know, right? And we have assumptions about our parents that are not true. And I think that it's upon us as the educators, right, when we have the students 6-7 hours a day, that as early as we can start introducing the concept of college for all of our students, the concept. It doesn't mean they're all going to go, but to talk to them about it, the greater chance we have of changing these numbers.
Thank you. Ms. Sutlow, we will continue with 3 minutes, being that it is just a little bit after 2. Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. I was one of those kids, by the way. People would have assumed that my parents talked to me about college all the time. They didn't. They didn't go to college. Their parents didn't go to college. It wasn't part of the dialogue in my family. They wanted the best for me, for sure. They wanted me to do well in life, but that wasn't part of the conversation in my family. And I do want to talk a little bit about one of the points that was raised on slide 36 about how access to resources impacts completion of college in 4 to 6 years. And tie it back to my previous round of questions about outside sabotage, running counter purposes with the school division's efforts. Right now in Washington, not far from here, the Department of Education's work is being sabotaged. And I'm particularly worried about the work in the FAFSA office, and not just in the ability for applications to be submitted in a clear and consistent way, but also the cutting of staff for people who need assistance in navigating this complicated process, especially for families where this is a new experience. I'm also worried about the repayment programs that are being cut or changed in such a way to disqualify swaths of students before they've even gotten into school, particularly income-based repayment programs and public service loan forgiveness. As a piece of context, in the previous administration of this president, more than 97% of educators who applied for public service loan forgiveness, one of the very specific occupations that the program was designed for, were rejected from public service loan forgiveness. Thankfully, that was righted in the following administration. I worry that we will be retreading in that ground. And so when Sally Mae is estimating that 30% of students who don't complete college after enrolling do so because of financial reasons, other estimates as high as 25%, I begin to worry about the undermining that's happening. Transitioning all of that work, all of that complicated work, and the oversight of that important work so that people are not being ripped off by student loan processors, now being transferred to a department that has never, I think the Small Business Administration, which has never worked in this space ever at all, ever, is highly concerning. So I wonder if there's anything we can begin doing with our 11th and 12th graders to prepare them for this new reality. As Ms. Marin likes to say, we're not responsible for every problem out there, but I worry that we will be telling a story in 3 years from now when these numbers start going down, because it's all the more difficult to, and this doesn't even get into, by the way, the fact that universities are going to have to skyrocket their fees because of program cuts from the federal government. You already have people having their acceptances for grad school and postdoctoral programs being pulled back in the sciences. So there's a compounding problem here with the financing of college. I'm wondering what we can do about it as a division to ensure that these numbers don't begin to bottom out.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. Dr. Reed, did you want to respond to a lot of that? That was a lot. Yes, and you have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I think that's the context we're living in right now, and I think we're going to have to be thoughtful about, while we are addressing the challenges in front of us today, we're going to have to be better at anticipating the challenges down the road. Because I have a concern that solving today's challenges may create bigger problems for us down the road, which I think is what you're pointing to. finally, as I've mentioned before, I think Fairfax County, we need to be very clear about how we define success for our students and our system, because the narrative that we're able to tell is most important on behalf of our educators, our students and families, and it's incumbent on us not to give that narrative up to other people to tell.
Thank you. Ms. Sizemore Heiser?
Dr. Anderson, would you
Oh,
mind if
I
I just...
apologize. I wasn't looking in that direction.
Just because I think we do have a number of resources that I would want families to be aware of in Fairfax County that we're going to continue to support, and we probably even need to do a better job advertising those. So just real briefly, I would mention, first of all, we do have our College Success Program in Fairfax County, which has a number of different components. So there's the Early Identification Program, for example, that supports students that are first-generation college students in all of our high schools. We partner with our local universities, 2- and 4-year universities, to support and provide opportunities for students there. We've got a direct admissions program that we just started 2 years ago with George Mason University, that if a student has a certain GPA, and it's like a 3.0 GPA, they don't have to take the SAT. They help them with financial aid. They give them mentorship and coaching, but they're automatically admitted to George Mason. And when they get admitted through that program, they get ongoing support. We have our partnership with College Access Fairfax that supports students free of charge and, applying for federal financial aid and other scholarships, and that's outside of what we do with our college and career centers that exist at every high school. So we have a lot of things that I think we should be really proud of, and I definitely want our families in Fairfax County to know that, because given all the uncertainty at the state and federal level, it's going to be left to us at the local level to provide that support to every one of our families. So I just wanted to mention, we do have some assets to continue to build on.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sizemore Heiser.
Thank you. And I think I wanted to start by building on that comment I think that you made about needing to tell our own story here. And I think this is going to be more important than ever. So to pick up on what my colleague had talked about with the slides 19 and 20 on the 4-year graduation indicator versus 6-year versus our on-time graduation indicator, I just want to confirm for the 4-year federal graduation indication, which the state is now going to also use as part of its assessment or accountability system, for students, multilingual students and students with disabilities who are federally legally allowed to stay for 8 years after 12th grade, whether to earn a standard advanced diploma or just to get post-secondary skills, life skills training, those students, when it says on the slide, do not count, you're saying they do not count towards graduation, but they do count in the denominator. I just want to make that clear. Yeah, because it's not clear from the slide, right? Because if they do not count and they're allowed to have the extra time without it hurting us, that's a very different story. Then they still count in the number of students in that cohort, but the fact that they're exercising their federally their rights, protected rights under federal law, multiple federal laws, is going to hurt the schools. I think that is part of that story we need to tell, and I just wanted to really get that clarity out there. And I think that's important to say that the state, and I've heard, states leaders say they really support our special education and multilingual students, are actually putting in indicators that directly make it much harder for schools to support those students in accessing their federal rights. And I think that's a really important point that we need to make. But I think the other thing I wanted to say is, just to pick up my point from before in terms of those indicators about graduation equity, you do have some in the report, right? If as you kind of skim through some of the pages of the report, you talk about on page 40, 41, 34, but especially 41, the POG poll numbers, right, on page 41 in the report. And I wanted to point this out because when we had the grading policy debate in governance, we talked about measuring portrait of a graduate skills, right? And I was kind of surprised to see the low percentages of students who've accessed a POG poll, which is a portrait of graduate presentation of learning. And I just want to help understand the numbers. I'm seeing 2%, 3%, 3%. The baseline denominator is 100, and 78,091, but the numerator is 4,557. So are we saying only 4,557 of all of our students have done a POG poll? So that's 3% of all of our students. which I think this goes to show why this was important. I mean, I know that's not the only place we have portrait of graduate skills, but if that's, when I scrolled back up to, slide 40, page 40 in the report, it's similar numbers for attainment of portrait of graduate competencies in digital financial literacy. I would love to see this broken out more. What are you using to measure, and how is it being measured, and who's having access to this? Because these numbers, we might as well not, which is what I said in grading, we might as well not have portrait of graduate if it's 2% and 1%. And I'm a full believer in it, but we've got to figure out how to measure it better, and that's part of this graduation equity. I know my time's up, I'll take another go back. But Doctor, if you want to comment on that, I'd appreciate it, or Dr. Presidio.
So I think that it's clearly a data point that we were asked to measure. Dr. Ponce, do you want to comment on POG poll and the number of students or priority placed on that? Because 2%, less than, a single percent is certainly low. Dr. Ponce, please.
Yeah, I will ask Sloan. He has been working with them, and then I will add.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I think it's an excellent question and point that you raise. And the reason that N size is so small is because we haven't required the completion of presentations of learning, right? So we require the incorporation of POG skills into our curriculum and into our instruction. But POG poll itself is meant to be a culminating project, if you will, almost an exhibition of learning that students complete to demonstrate the evidence of completion of those attributes, the development of those attributes. But as a school system, because when we brought this on, it's only been a couple years, we've been involved in so much change and so many things that are new, a new strategic plan, coming out of COVID, a new, new sets of expectations. We have not required POG poll to be completed for all of our students. So that's why that N size is really small. And that is something that, I think if we were to require it, obviously, we'd see very different data there. But that's the reason that's so small right now.
And slide 40 or page 4?
And I just want to add. Yeah. So I know on page, I think it's 41 that you were reading. We are right now, actually, we have been working with high school principals and the RASes to make sure that it will not be a requirement for graduation, but it's something that's going to be implemented. So everybody will have the portrait of a graduate. Very soon you're going to see those numbers changing.
My time's up, so I'll take a go back to, because I have further comment on it.
Ms. Anderson?
I just wanted to put one more plug in. I've been saying this since I heard about the accountability and accreditation stuff. We have to make sure that we're telling the story of what's actually happening in our schools, and we need to do it early and often because our parents are going to start seeing numbers come out that show that our schools are failing at a particularly delicate moment. The other thing that I want to say is, well, of course, as a former college instructor, I absolutely want our kids to go to college. And I also know that not every kid needs or should go to college. And so I want, as we're having those discussions with our kids younger and younger, I want them to understand the breadth of opportunity that there is out there, because the return on investment for college right now is diminishing, unfortunately, because of lots of reasons, including increased prices and all the things. And so I just want to make sure that we're opening up the full opportunity. We've all seen the slides that have been shared related to that a high school diploma just doesn't do it anymore. We got to have more training, more something after. And so I think having kids fully understand what the after could look like, it helps them understand what they're working towards. And so I want to make sure that that is part of the story as we are talking to kids younger and younger about what, and it actually helps them understand why this school is so important. So I think that that's what I'm hearing personally quite a bit lately, is that they don't see the point. And so I would very much like us to encourage that conversation more and more so that we can help kids see and keep that curiosity for a little bit longer.
Okay, now it's Ms. St. John's Gunning.
So I'm going back to the slide the six-year slide, which I failed to mention when I talked about, when I was talking about our CTE program. Also, huge proponent of our special education program, particularly for our young adults that are in our centers where they're staying beyond, staying for those extra years. And again, we've got to control the narrative and show the narrative where these kids are being trained to be active and productive in our communities and are getting jobs right after they exit, even if it's 6 years that it took for them to graduate. So I think that that story has to be told. And I think that's a piece that I know that I've worked a lot with Pulley Center throughout my career for different reasons, and have seen the amazing work that goes on there and seen the pride of our students and seen how happy they are to learn certain skills that they then take to the community. And so I think, again, we need to be telling those stories, and we do need to have the alternative data, which I think throughout some of the things that we've come across this year is like, this is the data that's needed, but let's tell the real story, and this is the alternative data, and we need to present that. And so I want to just echo what Dr. King said. We need to start at elementary school, talking to kids about what they need. And I know that when I worked as a family liaison and my kids were in the Spanish immersion program and I started talking about it then as a parent liaison, I would tell our multilingual learner families, keep them in that language, because by the time they graduate from high school, they're going to have the equivalent of language credits in high school. And this is something that parents didn't understand. They already have a skill, and we're just going to hone it. And so speaking from elementary, and just to give an excellent example, which I'm very proud of, although this student did not end up graduating from a Fairfax County Public School because they moved, but worked with this family since they were in preschool. That young lady has gotten a Posse scholarship, is now going to UVA, full ride with additional scholarships, because that story was told from elementary school. And she started here, she didn't end here, but I know that that message and that story was there since elementary school, and we're partly responsible for that success. Again, going back to controlling that narrative is critical. So I would like to see that, and look, it's easy for us, after you do all this amazing work that you bring to us, and then it's easy for us to say, but where's this, or where's this? And I really want to give you kudos for all the work that you've done, because I do know and recognize it's a lot of work.
Just real briefly, and I'm going to ask Jen if she wants to contribute anything to this or not. Just so families are aware, we are doing academic and career planning earlier than high school. I was focusing my comments because we were talking about graduation at high school and building that 4-year plan once you walk in the door at 9th grade. But we're doing similar activities in middle school, even down into the elementary grade levels. So Jen, I don't know if you want to comment just briefly on that.
Well, one other point that I wanted to make is that we have an upcoming Academic Matters plan to talk to you about our AVID expansion, and I think you'll be really excited to hear about what's happening in our elementary schools with those schools that have taken on AVID, especially our Title I programs that are expanding. So I really appreciate all the emphasis on Let's Start Early, and that's another example that we'll get to celebrate with you soon.
Mr. Moon?
Okay, I know that a former director of student services where my kids attended high school is in the audience, and I don't want to embarrass him because he was a good director. But with that said, with such a large caseload that each of our guidance counselors has, how well do they really get to know all students? Constantly on my mind, especially when I heard, Dr. King mentioning about her own experience in another school district where a student confided to her that nobody mentioned about me going to college until high school junior year. I'm glad to hear that we are starting, that kind of conversation much earlier than junior year. But at the same time, I still wonder, given the large workload, caseload, how much individual attention we can give to each and every student, especially those who may need more help than others. When our students fill out their 4-year plan, do we set aside time for them to do it in school versus outside the school? We do it in school.
Yeah, so I think, again, you're raising a really good point. I mean, our counselors work so hard to support students and families in so many different ways. Oftentimes, the academic piece, they don't have as much time to spend on that as they would like, right? Because they're working on so many other things. That's why we feel that the advisory program that we've required middle schools and high schools to have for the last 2 years with a really intentional curriculum is so important, because that's a teacher working now with a group of about 20 students, or an administrator, because administrators have sections of advisory as well, focused on a couple different things. One is academic support, one social emotional learning, but the big bucket that we're really focused on is academic and career planning. So that's somebody who can spend a lot more time, individual time and attention, build relationships with students, understand their career goals, maybe understand some of the challenges that they might face in realizing those goals, and help them understand the resources and assets that they have to be able to accomplish their goals and overcome challenges. So it's still new. I know some of our teachers have struggled a little bit with the new expectations, and I appreciate that. But it's so important that we provide that one personalized, trusted adult in the building who is going to be able to give that focused attention to our students, because counselors cannot do it on their own.
Dr. Presidio, you mentioned about one trusted individual adult in the building, importance of that. One of the things that, again, going back to presentations, some of the presentations I attend include a presentation about finding out whether a student feels that he or she has a trusted adult in the building. I think, Dr. Kim, did you want to say something? No. Okay. Since I still got about a minute left, I know today is not the time to discuss about particular strategies dealing with multilingual learners. But another thing that I picked up from this conference was about use of AI in helping and assisting multilingual learners. Because in as much as we do want to provide individualized one-to-one help on every single student, that's not possible given the budget constraint. How AI can be very instrumental and beneficial to that. And I would love to have that offline conversation with Superintendent and also Mr. Polio and Dr. Presidio regarding that.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. I'll go ahead and take my turn. Still going back to the slide that I had earlier, which is slide 31. And what I believe that I heard, Ms. Neal, is that one of the root causes that staff developed, concluded, was that the course-taking contributed to this. So that's where the work is going to be happening. And similarly, we heard the same conversation with Dr. Bell that has existed in research for the past 25 years, which is the expectations of those around those students really determine what they have access to. So that brings me to the equity work, because you can have the expectations, but then without true tolerance and understanding, it will just be minimally complied with, which will still leave a lot of kids in the gap. I would love to hear what is the work happening in the equity office to try to instill in staff that all of our students have gifts that a parent doesn't have, because I've heard of this too, where parents of students of color have to fight in order to access advanced courses that their children are way more capable of handling, but yet is still being denied by those who are the gatekeepers. What are the strategies in the equity world to bring staff along to help impact the course taking, which I've been told will be the primary impact to this data set?
Dr. Anderson, just like I shared earlier, having embedded equity specialists in the region, right, they're at the table where the discussion is happening. We have a great tool that allows us to monitor graduation rates and how students are enrolling. Particularly, I'll give an example of our goal of getting all students to take Algebra 1 by the 8th grade, right? When we monitor it and we see it not happening, then we can go back and have those conversations. A lot of it is still the mindset work that we have with our staff. And, my team is responsible for making sure that we have culturally appropriate training for our teachers and school-based administrators and counselors to ensure that implicit bias doesn't show up when we have expectations for all of our students. So when you say specific strategies, we have been training around equity for a very long time in this district through our modules, and it's ongoing expectations and refreshers around what that looks like. And the data tells us our story and compels us as the equity voices at the table, whether it's me at senior leadership or my team members at the areas that they lead, to continue to have those conversations, right? The data always compels me, and my colleagues can assure you, and Dr. Reed, that we speak up when we see something. And everybody in this room who works for Fairfax County is trained in this work, and they understand that we have to even check our own biases when we're putting in strategies or even talking about strategies that impact data that looks like this.
Thank you. Picture this, Sicily, 1965. Nobody understands what that is. Yeah. But picture this, you have a parent who wants these things for their child, and their child may not be receiving it, and they don't know what's even, or even a parent who doesn't even know what is available. And I want to connect this to the conversation that Dr. Presidio had regarding the 4-year career plan, how we have brought this down to the lower level. And I tend not to be a school board member who thinks that my experience is the experience, but I have yet to see this happening at the middle school level communicated to me. So I wonder if there's an opportunity, the same way that we're sending out these attendance reports now, so you get your attendance report card, I would love as a parent to be receiving some of these career plans. Like, this is what's available. Minimally, it will compel two things. It will either give me information in terms of what's going on, like, oh yes, my kid is on track, I don't have to have this conversation at home, or it might compel, oh, I didn't know this is available for my child. That's a conversation, because I too have spoken with parents who are parents of juniors, even seniors, who have had zero conversations regarding post-secondary plans. And that does not align with the conversations we've had here.
Right, and I've tried to give as accurate of a picture as I can with some of those challenges. We're still new in the requirements. We're in year 2 of requiring the academic and career plan through advisory in this fashion. So I know it's not happening consistently from classroom to classroom like we envision it happening, right? We haven't gotten to full implementation yet. It is the expectation, right? In the places where it's not happening, I really would encourage families to reach out and share that information with us, share that information with the principal in the school. We're working to get to full implementation. And we do, to your point, need more proactive communication from the school to the home about what's actually happening. So that is something we're working on to try to figure out if there's better technology solutions to that so that we can reduce the workload of advisors in the advisory programming, having to provide that information. So we're continuing to look at enhancements to our current system. We're actually in the process of an RFP for a new system. We're using Naviance now. Some of us have talked about concerns with Naviance in the past. I don't know what vendor is going to be awarded the new contract, but that's in process right now. And the expectation is whatever tool we use in the future, that we do have better communication and better, family transparency so that families can really see what's happening. And, as a parent myself in the system, I'm sometimes wondering what's happening too, right? So I have to go.
Teacher in charge.
Well, but if you think about it, those of us who are in the system and have kids, we're inundated with information too, right? So I don't always do my best job of reading everything that comes, from the school to me for, the details about when the parent information night is going to be, and I'm sure that I miss things that, I shouldn't miss. So we've got to streamline our communication. It's got to be more strategic, and it's got to better meet parents' needs, because I feel like right now a lot of things are getting lost, if you will, and I don't think it's for lack of effort to try to communicate. It's not as effective as it needs to be.
Thank you. And the reason I spent 2 of my rounds just speaking about the slide, it's because we know what is not monitored, what is not measured, doesn't change. It doesn't get the attention. So I would love to see those monitoring points. I know right now they're identified as TBD, but we have to. Otherwise, next year, we'll be sitting right here having the same conversation and me giving you the same feedback, because this was my feedback last year.
Dr. Anderson, if I may, I wanted to just kind of follow up on a point that Dr. King was talking about when you were asking the question about, seeing these inequities play out. I think one of the exciting next phases of our ABLE work is the ability to use data to identify students who we've missed in the academic advisement process, who have that success potential to go in and be successful in these courses. So part of that ABLE work is flagging with objective data, here is a list of students who you should be talking to about going into these advanced coursework opportunities. And that's one of the strategies we just used to really focus in on Algebra 1 enrollment for next year, using that objective data, identifying lists with schools, having them go back and have intentional conversations with students and families to say, you're ready for Algebra 1. You will be successful. And sometimes that's a little bit more of a conversation with the family to say, we believe in your child and they're ready and we're going to provide the support that they need. So to your question, I think that intentional use of objective data to help support scheduling is one of the strategies in the path forward here.
Dr. Anderson, when we talk about our equity, right, I want to say that, I've been in this district for almost 30 years. I've had 2 children that went through this. I was one of those parents that had to fight to get my kids in algebra many years ago. I can tell you now that we are more focused than we've ever been around letting data drive our decisions to move the numbers. I guarantee you, and I might not be here, but I guarantee you, because Dr. Reed might kill me for saying this, but that those numbers are not going to look like that next year. Those numbers are not going to look like that next year.
Well,
We are more focused. We are more focused.
I guarantee you, I will be looking at these numbers next
All
year.
right. So it's going to be me and you sitting across this table. Dr. Reed, I got you.
So that was interesting conversation.
That's one of those interesting.
Yeah. Rashna already went, yeah. So I wanted to ask about the students who do we have a data? Marcy, maybe probably you can tell me about this. How many of our high graduate students are coming out with credits for like associate degree? Because we talked about the college expenses and how we can support those students.
We're going to have to go back on that one, Ms. Dixit, to see if we can collect that information as a follow-up.
Yeah, because if 66% of our students are coming out of with advanced diploma, it should definitely they have a lot of college credits, and I give this in a way. I won't say this is for every student, but my son graduated from FCPS last year. He almost had 1.5 years of college credits with him. So which reduces the financial burden on the families for paying for college. And there are obviously dual enrollment courses, a great option for that. And I feel like the students who are, the dropout levels will look very different if the students know that they don't have to pay for so many years of college, and also they know that there are other pathways for them.
I know that is one data point that we're looking at, as Dr. Reed has talked about, communicating our message, being able to talk about the percentage of our graduates who are leaving here with college credits and how many college credits our students are leaving here with. So that is something we're in the process of pulling.
I want to add that one. We have been actually working with Sloan Department. I know, Jen, we have been meeting and looking forward to start giving that. We have a lot of schools where probably one class or just kind of name it a little bit different, and the students will be earning an associate degree, which means money for the parents. And it's something that I think that I have been discussing. This is my second year, and we are very close to make sure that we bring that to the children. I know we were talking about, as a parent, I'm a parent of 2, and they earn an associate degree. Sophie is 20, and she's a full-time teacher. And this is exactly what I was looking at right now, is our students starting with those who like to be teachers. and then looking for grants, and they finish their associate degree in teaching early childhood, and then going and work with some universities. 2 more years, there are some grants, and then they finish their bachelor in teaching, and then we have teachers. So we had to be thinking on that. We have been working. I'm very excited. What are the next steps? And I want to say thank you to Sloan team. This is Jem Glazer. We started that working, and there have been some hiccups, but I know that they are about to be removed. And so I'm very excited that it's going to be an option for our children.
Thank you. That is really good to hear. I'm going to go back to our meetings managers meeting, and Arnados, I remember you said something which struck with me. You said students are in school for 7 hours a day or 8 hours a day. It's absolutely our job to make sure we meet their needs and we are making them ready for their graduation or their future. So I just felt a little frustration in your that day that you said maybe you were missing a mark somewhere, and maybe you meant for this particular data sheet right behind us. Could you speak to that a bit? Because I think our board will benefit from that.
So I think what I was referring to is we know that there's outside noise in all that we do, but while we have responsibility for the students that we serve, we can't depend on outside noises or outside voices to share with our students what their opportunities are as students in Fairfax County Public Schools. So I deeply believe that we as the educators, while we have the students in our service, owe them everything that we have, right? And so sometimes when people say, well, their parents have to work 2 jobs, where their parents are not engaged, none of that should matter because we have our students in our care for 7 hours. It's great when students have that additional support, but whether they do or not, it's our responsibility as a school system to provide access and opportunities to every student who walks in the door.
Thank you for that. And I see that a lot of this numbers, the slide where it shows how much, and I'm just going to say as an Indian parent, how much we start talking to our kids from elementary, and I think it's a lot of an Asian culture too, that in elementary grade you start talking about post-secondary education. It comes, the culture is nothing wrong, but that's how it is. My only point was that those students come with a very preset mindset. It's not before even the teachers talk to them or even before they get guided by the guidance counselor, they know what they want to do in their life because the parents are putting those seeds in their mind. How do we take that out of the picture? How can we level the field in this type of situation?
I think if you remember in that conversation, I shared with you that if I had a chance to go back in my career, I'd want to be an elementary school principal and meet with every student that walks into my door and talk to the parents about what's your hopes and dreams for your child and map that out with them before they even walk into the school so that every parent has an understanding of what access and opportunity means. And I think it compels us as a school district to strike down systematic barriers that we've had in place forever, right? That students who are not privy to the cultural things that you speak of, but still have the same access and opportunity, whether their parents start to talk to them about that at a very young age, that we as a school system communicate that. So we have to find ways. I remember in another district that I worked for shortly, we did put maps together for parents to start, what are your hopes and dreams? But the map also gave several opportunities, right? Whether a child wanted to go the VOTEC route, whether the child wanted to go to a 4-year, 2-year military, it was a map that started in kindergarten, and it just showed parents ways of which their kids could achieve what their hopes and dreams are until their students develop their own hopes and dreams. And I think that we have a responsibility as a school system to communicate that to our parents.
So here is I think the final word. I would say that instead of talking to kids, their parents in high school about college, we got to start talking in elementary school about that. I wouldn't say 1st, 2nd grade, but at least the 4th, 5th, 6th, at least putting that seed in their mind. My time is up. Yep.
Oh, that was perfect. Ms. Setlow, we will do 2 minutes for the next round, except for Ms. Marin, who this will be her second. So she will get 3 minutes.
I I've seen like what can happen when the superintendent puts forth something that's really tangible, like benchmark literacy. And this is like such a clear plan, right? Everyone knows what they're doing, the schedule's set. And, you know, there's been many conversations here, and certainly myself with the superintendent and others, about the communications piece to family. And when I hear about we're looking at a new system other than Naviance, I really haven't used it, even though I have a freshman. But I wonder if it's kind of like Schoology, where it had not ever been intentionally taught, and the teachers had never been intentionally trained on it. And I really feel like I'm saying very similar to what I said last time, and we have great things, but if you don't know where to find them. And I do wonder at times, you know, what decisions the board makes that creates the work that maybe detracts staff. I don't know, maybe that's a little piece of it. But, you know, how do we make the commitment to the communications and the kind of mapping that Dr. King talked about, the way we've made the commitment about literacy? Because I wonder if we didn't spend another dollar on anything extra, could we just change the behaviors so that we can start to do this? Like you know, again, being a high school parent, I get a lot of input. And I've had instances where, you know, students are struggling to manage Schoology or their calendar, and the students being told, well, you're in high school now, we expect you to have more ownership. Well, no one ever taught that kid how to do Schoology. I mean, if we equate it like dyslexia, it's like, why would we expect a dyslexic kid to understand how to learn to read the typical way? Like, I think until we really change it, it's not, we can talk about all these great things, college success program, you know, things are not advertised. I have one middle school, they do an amazing job day where they bring in adults to come and, you know, job fair. Should that be standard? Should every school have a job fair or a college fair? Or I think, too, that gets at the equity. We have some great things happening, but only in some schools, and sometimes it's the PTAs are running it or the star volunteer. Like, can we be more standard about this stuff starting next school year? I know we made a little movement with the website and stuff, but I still could not tell you how to enroll my kid in a dual enrollment class. And she's taking driver's ed over the summer, and I still don't know if that means she's going to be driving by August. I mean, I'm not ready for that. But I don't know. So I just, can we just, yeah, that's what I want to share.
So, Dr. Presidio, the communication comes out of your department. I know Jen Glazer, I know we've met a couple times. What are our plans to address that differently this year?
Well, I think I heard a number of different things in Ms. Marin's comment. I mean, what I tried to say about communications earlier is, and I shared kind of my own story about that, like sometimes I'm missing things because there's so many things that the school is communicating about. I do think we need to get more streamlined and more strategic about that, and I think that's a division-wide effort to try to figure out how to do that. That's why I mentioned the Naviance tool, because that is a communications tool on what we're talking about now, academic and career planning. But not everybody knows how to use it, right? So there's questions about it and challenges with it. We are working on tightening up the way that we communicate academic and career planning information division-wide. So I think we've shared with the board some initial plans, maybe in a Friday letter, if I'm not mistaken, of some of the things that we did this year to try to standardize things, right? So a common set of information on school websites, right? So that everybody's getting the same information. We're going to be standardizing the content that families receive in those information sessions next year. Jen's team's going to be working to create the content, and schools can add to it, but there's going to be a core set of content, the key messages, the key things that families need to understand about academic and career planning. Again, the academic and career plan itself, figuring out how to get the information back to families in a way that's accessible to them. So that's part of our kind of ongoing project plan that the four of us up here, I guess the five of us up here that you see, are working on when we talk about addressing some of these gaps that we see in our goal report. So there's things in process right now, and there's things that I think are going to make a difference. But it is a challenge because I think people are inundated with information right now. I really do. And we've tried to also provide things, Ms. Marin, to the point that you made about something might be happening in one school but not another. As it relates to college and career planning, we've tried to standardize some things by saying, okay, what can we do at the division level for everybody that anybody can take advantage of that you don't have to have at your local school? So the career fair is one of those things that we do, and we bring in colleges from around the country, and families from all of our comprehensive base high schools can attend those. Instead of saying instead of saying high schools should do that themselves, we do that centrally. On the workforce side, we run an instruction to industry event to help students understand internship opportunities, summer employment opportunities, future career opportunities. We do that centrally so that every high school doesn't have to try to replicate that, and some do it better than others. So it's a balance between the things that we try to offer at the division level, the thing for all schools, the things that we try to develop at the division level to provide to schools so that schools and families are getting information in consistent ways, and then continuing to refine the ways from the school that we communicate more strategically to the home. And I do think the advisory, I know I've talked about that a lot today, but I think that advisory is really important because that's one teacher with a small group of kids where I think communication can be, it can be a strategy that might work better coming in a smaller setting than when you're communicating something to, thousands of families in the school.
Well, thank you, and you're right about the division-wide events. There's some great, things and the additional things you said. And also, I think it was Dr. King just said, we have them during those hours of the day. So when I think of this, like I'm going to be on this panel at Langston Hughes Middle School to talk about my job, and it's during the school day, right? So how do we keep capitalizing on, we have the students where we have them, and like, it's also the delivery method. I was just looking at my phone because I've got a text that, there was a boundary review committee update, and a text because my kid's in a certain club and they're going to go on a field trip. And I was talking, I think, with Dr. Ponce, our families are using this. They're not on laptops, right? So how is this going to relay, and graphics, people aren't reading. So how do we graphically,
Happy to put you on a go back, Ms.
Well,
Mary.
yeah, I just, I don't hear that in the response, the actual delivery method.
So, Dr. Presidio or Jen, the actual
Well,
delivery method?
I mean, I think it's a good point. Again, I think that's a division-wide challenge for us, right? We've got to work across departments. The communication office has expertise in communication technologies that maybe my team doesn't have, right? So all of us have to work together to enhance those systems. We are doing, to your point, a lot more direct, text messaging. I could just give you an example when we were trying to do immunizations and get information to families about immunizations. But I know, but my point is, the reason we were able to do that is because that was the Department of Special Services, our health team, collaborating with the communications office to figure out how to put the messaging and the technology and deliver it in a more strategic way. And I think we've got to figure out how to do that on the academic side as well as the operational side.
All right, thank you. Oops, thank you. I think we only have 3 people for go-backs, so we'll just stick with the 3 minutes, Ms. Setlow, because it doesn't make sense to have go-backs. Ms. Eismore-Heiser, and then Ms. Anderson.
Thank you. A couple things I wanted to mention. I wanted to go back to talking about communicating our story. And Dr. Reed, one of the questions I have as we're doing the second year of these new accreditation, are we planning on maybe releasing, and we have it a little bit here, the on-time graduation rates versus the 4-year federal, but are we planning on putting together a communications strategy plan that kind of goes beyond that and packages it a little bit in some of the ways that I think we're doing around our budget and kind of sharing our budget story? I think it would be important to share that, to say, here's how the data would look on the old standards, here how it looks on the new standards, here's the challenges, for example, what we talked about with the students with disabilities and multilingual students. I think that would be an important thing to put together because I want transparency for our community to understand the different impacts of the changes that we have. So I think that's an important piece that I'd like to maybe see more of. I know it's maybe not related to the goal report, but just something going forward. The other thing, I did have a couple of questions. I wanted to go back to my comments on page 40 and 41 of the report around the portrait of a graduate skills. And the reason I bring this up, page 40 actually doesn't talk about POG poll, which I understand you're saying is a end of culmination, and I get that it's a culmination project. But page 40 just talks about, and it's some rubric that's mentioned about portrait of a graduate skills, financial literacy skills, and digital literacy skills. And bring this back up because these skills are, when we were at the South by Southwest conference, when I talk to employers, what I see in colleges, in a world that is dominated by technology and an increasingly AI world, the skills people need are those embedded in Portrait of a Graduate: communication, creativity, teamwork, critical thinking. That's what those skills are. Financial literacy, digital literacy. And so when I see numbers at 1%, and page 40, the numbers are pretty similar to the POG poll, 1%, 2%, 3%, I do think this is a critical area because, I have lots of information right here in my hand. The skills our students are going to need in these jobs that you keep saying don't exist yet is the ability to analyze, apply, connect, and use and know which information they should use and which they shouldn't use, and all of those pieces. So I do think figuring the data points on page 40 and 41, whether those are the measurements, others, is super important in this era. So I keep going back to that. The other thing I wanted to mention really quickly, on page 54, 23-24 school year, 31% of students with disabilities level 2 got the applied studies diploma, seniors, 31%. I know it's level 2 students, 4% at level 1. I would love to see how many of those 31% were originally on the SOL track at some point and then removed, and when. How many of those students achieved a standard or advanced diploma in those additional 8 years? And how many of those students are we able to give that path to? And do we have the right transition programming for them? The last thing with the special permission, if I just finish my sentence, locally awarded verified credit, I so appreciate that we're doing more of an effort to educate families on that because that has existed since 2018, and I know because I'm the one who lobbied for it. But we also need to make sure families also know that if they utilize that and their student receives a standard diploma on time, they cannot access the post-secondary transition program, Davis, Pulley, and STEP, which is why that middle school 4 to 8 year planning is so important. I'll leave it at that. I know my time is up.
Ms. Anderson.
One thing I want to say is I didn't know that we were doing a career fair count or division-wide, and if I don't know, then its chances are real good that other people don't know. So if you can keep those division-level invites coming to us so that we can make sure that we push it out so that we can increase visibility for those events, that's awesome. The second thing is I was sitting here thinking about like the accreditation system and everything, and is there any good news related to like things that are highlighted as things that actually help us show off how awesome we are? Like what happens if a kiddo graduates early? Because they technically wouldn't be on time. So does that mean that they're the denominator for the year that they would have graduated and not counted? Or how does that work? Anybody know?
So, Beatrice, I don't know if you can help us here, and I'm just going to be totally honest
I'm
and say...
not trying to be flippant. It's a real question, right?
No, I think it's a good question, and Beatrice is a lot less cynical about some of this stuff than I am, so we'll see if Beatrice can help.
I may be cynical, but I'll try to stick to the facts. The way that the calculation works is the student has graduated at any point within those 4 years. So they might graduate after 2 years or 3 years or 4. They would not count into the denominator until that 4th year, their 4th year of high school after entering 9th grade that first time. And then at that 4th year marker, again, regardless of when at that point they achieved their diploma, they would be in the denominator. And if the diploma was there, in the numerator as well.
Well, that's good news at least, but I do want to make sure also that we're highlighting when we're talking about the things that would craft around our story. I do want to make sure that we're talking about how many kids are taking dual enrollment classes, how many kids, because I do understand that that's a part of the accreditation system, is that the more kids that we can get through those dual enrollment, particularly if they actually receive an entire associate's degree while they're in school, which is a whole set, that's not actually our job. But I do appreciate the fact that we are making headway in some of those things. So I want to keep cheerleading for things that should be included in that story that we need to tell, and highlighting those particularly awesome moments for us is really important.
If I could, because I really appreciate that, Ms. Anderson. One thing, maybe I shouldn't say this, but the dual enrollment, like the biggest barrier to the dual enrollment is the requirements that our state has for the certification a teacher needs to have to give those credits. That's different from state to state, depending on the state's accreditation or accrediting agency. And we've had that as part of our legislative package here for a number of years, but that is our biggest obstacle, is being able to have our teachers offer the classes, right? We know that they can teach them. That's not the issue. It's the Higher Education Commission saying that they're not qualified to do so. So we've made good growth in terms of expansion of dual enrollment credits. We've tried to incentivize teachers to get those additional endorsements when they can. We've worked tirelessly with not just Northern Virginia Community College, but George Mason, other four-year universities like James Madison, to get agreements for dual enrollment, but that continues to be a real barrier for us. And if we could remove that barrier, then you would see, I think, a pretty big expansion. And those are the kinds of things when the state imposes a new accountability framework like this, that they ought to be helping us remove those types of barriers and challenges. And they've been completely absent from that conversation. So anyway, I just share that as a point of frustration. So.
Well, I can definitely tell you that we're not likely, anybody who gets the dual enrollment possibility, we're not likely to lose them to higher education because we pay significantly better than most folks earn at the college level. But what I will also say is that this is something that we definitely should be talking to our state partners about seeing what we can do about legislation, because this is the moment that they're thinking about those things. So I appreciate that.
Ms. St. John Cunning.
So just to tell a good story, as we were talking about this, and we were talking about elementary level and talking about maybe going across some of our silos. I do know that when I was a family liaison, we did teach classes for parents where they did talk about hopes and dreams, parenting classes. And one of the classes that we taught was where the parent created a box and put hopes and dreams in for their kids, and would then at the end share it and also ask the kid to share hopes and dreams. And this was supposed to be a living document or a box where the kids and the parents could keep adding as they went along. And so we talk about our educators and all the great work that they do, but I also wanted to highlight that our family liaisons are doing great work within our communities, particularly our underserved communities. And these programs can be duplicated, and we have to work across silos, because catching the kids early is important, and having those ideas of hopes and dreams that they can be reached regardless of where you come from is really important. And I think not just empowering our kids, but empowering our parents is critical. So I just wanted to share that positive story, and maybe we can figure out how we can expand that.
All right, I think I'll take my last turn, and then we will probably close this. I did have a question that I didn't get a chance to ask. This is on the, I guess, page 12. I don't know if it's slide 12. I know it's page 12. When you talk about the targets, it is table 3. When I took a look at the baseline targets from last year's, that when we set the baseline, the target for the 23-24 school year was 78, but on this, I'm sorry, for multilingual students, the target was 78, but in this document, it is 76. Similarly, for our Hispanic students, the target was 87, but on this one, it's 84. Who can speak to those changes, please, and why?
So I'm happy to speak to those changes, Dr. Anderson. This year, we created those growth lines that show the line that we need to continue to stay on as a system for each of our data points to be able to meet our 2030 goals. In some cases, those growth lines are much more steep, where we need to make gains well beyond the 5 percentage points each year. In some cases, those lines are not as steep, and we do not need to make as much as 5 percentage points each year. When we exceed the targets in any given year, so when they're, in some of these cases, when we've exceeded the target, it means we're on track to meet our goal potentially earlier than anticipated. If we're not meeting those targets on that growth line, it's signaling to us as an organization that we need to pay additional attention to, bring additional resources, adjust our strategies, that we are not on track for either overall or a particular student group. So we applied that adjustment across all of our metrics so we could see the actual growth that was needed year over year to hit our 2030 targets.
I hear you, but I don't understand still, or perhaps it's because I don't agree, why we needed to reduce the goal just so we can get there, because that's the group, particularly looking at the ML, that's the group that is the farthest behind. So I'm not really understanding why we had to reduce the growth reduce the target in order to make the growth over the next 6 years. But we could just pause there. But I do want to talk about the 24, 25 targets for that same group for our ML students. Right now, the results from last year were 76.03, and the next target is 79, so that's a +3. For our Hispanic students, right now it's 85.84, and the target is 85.98. I'd love to understand that goal, that target a little bit better. It just seems to be so minimal.
Yeah, we can go back and double check the number, but it should be if you take our growth, if you take the time between the baseline and the 2030 goal, it's dividing the growth evenly amongst those years. So
I'd love a follow-up
yeah,
because
we can go back
it
and take a
doesn't
look.
seem to get us there.
Okay.
It wouldn't be an even because we're still at 85%, and we still know there's still a good number of disparity across the other groups. One other question that I had regarding the graduation rates, and I know that you've kind of lumped it together, where do we rank amongst the Northern Virginia schools? Are we first? Are we second? Are we?
Yeah, we're pulling some additional analysis, so we'll have that for the board on Friday.
Okay, thank you. My next thing is about Career Day. I know you talked about the district-wide Career Day, but I really want to talk about the career days that happen at the schools. Similarly to things like Math Olympiad, et cetera, the things that are happening at the school, which now we've standardized and making it happen. When kids see a doctor, a lawyer, an FBI agent, all of it in their classrooms talking to them, that just creates an opportunity to dream. And so it creates an opportunity to set that course-taking pattern to lead to perhaps what is or was in front of them, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. I'm just wondering, where do we have the space to, in our school day, to make that a better part of the culture that is not necessarily PTA dependent? Because we know those little intangible things really can impact the goal-setting factor. Dr. Reed, I'd love to hear from you about that.
Sure. I think that would fall under Ms. Glazer, the career fairs, the college and career readiness. Do we have a blueprint for making sure those are consistent across all schools? 2 microphones.
So we offer the central instruction to industry, which is during the school day, and schools may sign up to bring students on a field trip for that, and that was well attended this year. We did not have 100% of high schools attend, however, we did have a really positive turnout at that event, which continues to grow. As far as blueprints for what happens in the high schools during the school day for career events, we don't have a set of requirements for them, but there are a variety of good examples that are happening in the field. We do have a more standardized process for the college and career center specialists at the high schools hosting colleges. Some of them host upwards of 50, 60, 80 or more college visits every year. So it is something that we can take into account and, again, look to add to our plan for creating more custom or standardized consistent practices across schools. And career days do happen at every level. It's just not a requirement, and there's not a set template that every school is following.
So I do know that I would be remiss if I didn't comment on my SAC group's report on the Career Center, and I think a number of you heard that. The Superintendent Advisory Council, the kids really want mandatory visits to the College and Career Center in high school, I think starting as early as 9th grade. Because I think it's a bit inconsistent about how those are used. So I really am looking forward to a consistent plan on that. But I think elementary, middle, and high, I think as we think about the importance of career fairs, we're going to need to have maybe a template developed, so.
It's just a
to your
missed
point.
opportunity. It's so super low-hanging fruit, and when you have an elementary school kid just be excited about whomever's in front of them, again, that could set the course for a long time. I'll just ask my last question or make my last statement, and I'll move on. I do know that there's lots that we don't have control over. There is a lot, but there's a lot that we do have control over. And I do think there's a space for us to tell our story and to be mindful to articulate the work that is being done. Having said that, I think there also has to be a balance, because when we look at our data, we see that while our school division may be great for a lot of kids, it is not great for all of our kids. And so we have to be mindful of making sure we are keeping that perspective, because it tends to be the same demographic subgroup over and over and over again. So that probably won't land well with those parts of the community when we're just touting how great we are. But we are doing a lot of good things that need to be on record. But I'd like for us to be mindful of who it is that's going to see and hear that narrative and what their experience looks like. Ms. Marin, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually sending forward the example from Langston Hughes. So I think more compelling data would be how many high schools participated, how many students participated. I think it's too subjective to say we had a great turnout. Until it's 25 high schools, and I will also say our alternative schools. I helped Cedar Lane School obtain speakers for their career day, it might have been last year. And do you know what was the biggest aha of who to invite? Our own FCPS recruiters. They should be at every career day. Heck, we could just have an FCPS recruiting. I mean, again, this is very tangible to me. I don't get why, and you know, this time of year we're getting so many invites. I have invites in my inbox for events 2 days from now, and I have ones for 6 weeks from now. I mean, do we need to direct the superintendent to say, you know, the school year must include a middle school career day, a high school career day? Like, I've been talking about this for a while, and, you know, I've been on the Career Tech Advisory Committee. I was there for 2 years, and I've not seen much more consistent implementation. The quality might be high, but the consistency remains the same. And again, I think we could figure out, what do we send text messages to parents for? Is it for academics, or is it because a reminder for the 10th time that it's a half-day Monday? Is it to say, this is the time to do, like, I'll send around also, like, the feedback, but this seems very tangible and doable, and I really don't want another year to go by and we can't make these little tweaks that will make they are like no budget, it seems, or budget neutral. So I don't know, do we need to direct the superintendent to do this? Or is it part of Thursday's executive limitation when we talk about engaging the families and communities? Maybe that's a way to do it. I think we got to get in a better habit of codifying things, because we have such great conversations and sometimes they don't always make it to the implementation line.
Mr. John Gunning.
So I just want to make one comment, and I do love the idea of career days in elementary and in middle schools. I will say that the issue is staffing. I've helped plan those. It's who's going to plan it. If you don't have a robust PTA, it's very difficult. So when we're talking about equity and who's going to plan those, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and it may be cost neutral in the sense that we're not paying anyone extra, but people are working extra hours. So I love the idea of it, but I want to also calibrate in terms of the reality of it, because I've been involved in planning these, and I know what it takes, and I know that it's taken a lot of staff time that was after hours to do it. I just want to let you guys know that.
So as of 3:25 p.m., the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.